I had been warned that Happiness Charge was something of a contentious season, that this was one people either really loved or really hated. Last time a season was contentious, I ended up not really falling in love with it all that much. Sure, there were a few pieces of Doki Doki that I liked, but I found that the season was a bit messy on the whole, keeping it from rising to the top of my favorites. I don't think that Happiness Charge was in a very enviable position either. It seems to me like a season that had a lot of pressure on it to be good. It was, after all, the season that was meant to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the series, a big milestone for any children's property. Add on top of that they brought back in the director of Heartcatch, one of the most highly praised seasons, to direct again. I can see how a lot of people might have been looking at this to be basically a Heartcatch 2.0. But that was never going to happen. While they did bring back Tetsuya Nagamine to direct the series, the rest of the overlap in staff between the two comes mostly in the form of animators, storyboarders, and animation directors. One thing that is distinctly missing in the overlap is scriptwriters and series composer, which should be enough to give at least a little pause since one of the stronger elements of Heartcatch was the story and character writing. That's not to say that the animation wasn't a big appeal of Heartcatch, as it was indeed one of the standout highlights. But it wasn't the only appeal, it really worked in tandem with the writing and especially the character work. Most seasons of Precure honestly live and die on the strength of their casts. You can have the best story, but if the characters feel like cardboard cutouts, then we are not going to be invested in seeing them go about it after all. Writing is a big consideration, so when it seems like they were kind of trying to recreate the magic, that's not going to happen if you can't get those people back as well. This season really is proof of the way that this medium is a collaborative art form. Swapping out just a few key people can completely change the outcome of a series, and it takes the combined effort of things mixing together just right to make the magic happen. Even then, having the exact same team won't always make a miracle or a masterpiece happen twice. I'm not going to beat around the bush here. This is a season that didn't really manage to completely pull it together. There are some elements that are well done and some characters that I do love, but with Happiness Charged, the name of the game is mainly wasted opportunities. There are a lot of parts of this season that could have been done excellently or at least interestingly, but end up either undercooked or even completely dropped, which leaves the whole thing feeling pretty unsatisfying at the end of the day, which I think is more disappointing than usual for a season that was meant to be a celebratory anniversary. I mean, this season literally opened each episode with a greeting from one of the past season Precure characters, which was such a sweet and charming callback. So let's get into looking at just what happened with this season that caused it to turn out just how it did. Megumi is our, at this point, standard issue pink protagonist this season, and I actually like her quite a bit. She works great as a character that is flawed, but in a realistically teenage way, while also being quite charming to go through things with. Other pink leads of the past have been helpful in some way, but Megumi is a character where it really feels like that helpfulness is something that is an explicitly ingrained facet of her character and personality. It is established pretty early on that Megumi's mother is chronically ill and tends to need Megumi to give her help now and then as a result. This is new territory for Precure family dynamics and serves as an interesting starting point for Megumi. She has, for a while now, been her mother's helper, and from what I can see, seems to have kind of internalized that helper role as a core part of herself. Megumi is quick to jump in to help people in a way that feels like it's second nature to her, and she doesn't seem to ever stop to consider how helping might actually be something that affects her or might cause her trouble. For instance, one of the very first things we see is that she is jumping into some water to fetch something for a child and doesn't even pause to take off her shoes or socks. That's just how she is. Help first, think later. And to go down that route could have been something fun to explore. Sure, we had something similar with Mana in Doki Doki trying to run around and help everyone possible, but it wasn't something that was quite as instant and second nature as it seems to be with Megumi. Megumi's help also seems to be something that she is more likely to fumble or burn herself out with, which does seem to be a little more grounded than things were with Mana. There is definitely room here to do some kind of story about needing to accept help too, or letting her find the balance between wanting to help out and getting overzealous with it. There are multiple times where she inserts herself to help somewhere where she isn't completely wanted or needed. maybe let her find out where the line is and define herself outside of being a helper more. That said, I don't think the show really capitalized on what they had here for Megami in a way that was terribly compelling, and they kind of wasted some of what they had set up for her. For one, while Megami does get pushback when she sometimes is a little too much and gets to the point of meddling, there are also points where she doesn't get that pushback, and I think that those aren't the best handled. For example, there's an episode where Megami stumbles across another girl, Mami, who is really into rocketry and working hard to make sure she is able to pull off a personal project and goal, a rocket launch. Megami, thinking this is really cool and trying to help as many people as she can in the hopes of achieving her power-up, jumps in to try and give help where she's not actually going to be of any use. Not only does she prove to not be any help when she doesn't even know enough to be able to handle grabbing a tool for Mami, but she then reorganizes them so they're not in the place where Mami expects them to be or is used to them being. The pinnacle of Megami's failure to really help is when she inadvertently destroys a sentimental tradition that Mami was trying to maintain. Megami notices that the lab coat that she wears every day is pretty dirty, and when left alone, takes it upon herself to wash it, only to find out afterwards that this dirtiness was deliberate, as Mami was purposely not washing it until she had managed to complete her rocket launch. Sure, Megami doesn't know this, but it just goes to show how her desire to help is being a hindrance to Mami. Now, looking at all that, I think it's pretty clear the episode is setting up for a conclusion where Megami realizes that sometimes supporting someone from the sidelines can be more helpful and beneficial than trying to get physically involved in whatever they're doing. Near the end of the episode, after the magical fight of the day and a successful rocket launch, Mami asks Megami to keep supporting her, as in cheering her on. What Megami ultimately takes away from this whole experience and states to be her takeaway in the extremely short final scene of the episode is that it's really cool to see someone work so hard at something, and she wants to find something to work hard at like that too. Sorry, that's not really a conclusion that the episode built up to, and that's not really what Megami needs to learn out of this experience, given the mistakes we saw her making. It leaves the whole episode feeling like it didn't entirely come together and gel quite right. The setup is all there for Megami to make some progress with an internal issue that she might have, but then the series doesn't follow through on that connection to allow this to be a moment of growth or a perspective shift for her. She already has something she wants to work towards, getting that power-up form, so it feels strange for her to end the episode saying she wants to find something to work hard at. Megami's desire to help others, even to her own detriment, is something that eventually also just sort of stops coming up. Her mom shows up to kind of drive in the family situation like 2 times, and then the issue isn't really something that the series bothers with again, leaving this aspect of her just kind of hanging there unresolved. The problem is that the things that Megami is dealing with in relation to this don't fit cleanly into what the finale of the series is ultimately going to be about, so they kind of get shoved aside in favor of steering towards that direction, and the transition just isn't very smooth and sort of focuses things more towards a less engaging part of Megami's character. You see, Megami ends up being quite focused in the end on the idea of love, how love is ultimately a good thing and love brings joy to our lives and makes it worth moving forward even if we might sometimes get hurt. The main season of the villain is essentially dealing with nihilism in the face of having lost everything and wants to destroy everything in a rage as a result. Megami's counter to that being that he wouldn't feel this sorrow if he hadn't experienced the joy of love in the past, and it's still worth trying because we can find that love again. And just from laying that out, I think you can see the tenuous connection between Megami's experiences of trying to help others and the way that love is meant to be viewed as a sort of connecting force between people. Megami helping others is her way of showing love to them after all, and that love is something that is community building. However, this ends up feeling kind of muddled for some reasons we'll get into later, and Megami, despite being the lead, doesn't always feel like she was the character that was best suited to take up a solo conflict against the villain at the end of the season. What she has been dealing with over the season and the final climax of the series just don't mesh together very well, and this is complicated by the way that romantic love plays such a factor into Megami's story. We'll get into the whole Love Quadrangle nonsense of this season a little later, but suffice to say, Megami is tangled up in it enough that while I don't think it is actually the entirety of her character like I've seen some try to reduce her down to, I think it is enough of a factor in her story that it takes away from some of the other stuff that the season could have had going on with her and kind of derails things. There's a point in particular in the finale where a villain asks her to fall in love with him that ends up coming off as romantically coded, when the rest of the finale feels like it's not meant to be about romantic love. That leaves me wishing that the season had just chosen one form of love to really zero in on in order to avoid some of that mess. Megami ends up being mostly just serviceable as a protagonist as a result of all this. I feel like there were some ideas about her that really could have worked, but this was a season that was trying to do a whole lot, and as a result seems to have bitten off a bit more than it could actually manage. Like, it is interesting that in terms of the timeline, Megami was actually the last of our core characters this season to become a Precure. Megami just ends up getting a little lost in the shuffle with everything else that's going on, especially when there are other characters that have more direct emotional ties into some of the core plot, which ends up making it feel like they might have, perhaps, been better suited to be the lead of the series over Megami. Megami does very much come off as a normal girl who has been thrust into the middle of all this as a result of her not having those connections, which can make the moments where she is put to the test sort of hit when you remember that. But having her have so much solo one-on-one time against some of our core antagonists doesn't really connect as hard when you realize that there are other characters who it might have been more emotionally impactful to see face off against those antagonists. Hime, for example, is one such character that I have seen some argue is or should be the lead character of the season, and I can't even completely disagree with them about that. Hime is the literal princess of a kingdom that has been taken over and used as the base for the villains since it was the starting point where one of our major antagonists was released from a sort of Pandora's box situation. It follows then that Hime has one of the strongest ties to getting the whole situation solved since she has lost the most as a result of it. She also has one of the clearest places to grow from at the start of the series, since while she has already been doing the whole Precure thing for a while, it turns out that she is pretty abysmal at it, to the point where it seems like there's not really anything that she's going to be able to do on her own, so it's a good thing she ends up having Megami as a partner early on in the series. She's also depicted as being quite sheltered as the result of her privileged upbringing, this likely being the first really big struggle that she's faced in her life. So Hime ends up being a little bratty early in the series and really has to learn how to be around others, something only amplified by the way that she doesn't really seem to have a terribly good basis on how to interact with other people, leaving her with pretty severe social anxiety around those that she doesn't already have an established rapport with. I think even from me just laying out those flaws, you can kind of tell how Hime has some of the most obvious places to grow from and thus some of the most straightforward and laid out progression of any of the characters this season. She is the one who we see most visibly grow, going from someone terrified of interacting with her classmates on the first day of school to being intensely dedicated to doing her part by the time of the obligatory school festival episode. From whining and needing things done for her to picking up challenges and trying things on her own. From being pretty pathetic at the whole Precure thing to a warrior confidently standing alongside her friends. All of this is done with a sort of excitable energy that makes it clear they're kind of trying to replicate the lightning in a bottle that was Erica in Heartcatch. This isn't the only place where there are some superficial similarities to that season, by the way. I'm just not going to bring them up since they're usually, at most, surface level and don't matter in the long term. I don't think this is something that completely failed, but I do think it doesn't exactly endear you during some of Hime's more bratty moments earlier in the series to have this energy along with it, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were some who were turned off of her because of that. She's still a great character and brings a nice energy to the series, even if I'm able to see what they were trying to pull from in making her. She's also core to one of the bigger twists of the season, that being that she was the one who opened up the magical box that one of the main antagonists was sealed in and caused everything to go belly up as a result. Not only is she dealing with the situation where her kingdom has been completely consumed, she's dealing with the guilt that she is the one that was the cause of that. This is something she ends up hiding from the others as long as she can because she's worried it will make them hate her, which I do think is reasonable of her to think. It's because of her that tons of girls around the world need to fight to defend their homes from attack. It's because of her that her friends need to do that. There's also an enemy that is capturing and sealing away various Precures, one of which has a connection to one of our leads that we'll get to in a bit. Hime is able to see all of these things, and I don't blame her for thinking this might upset her friends. Of course, she patches things up with them pretty quick because of the kind of show this is, but I liked seeing her keep something like that from them. However, this is something that feels a little inconsistent with how she's portrayed earlier in the series. It isn't until there is a chance her secret might become known or that secret gets hinted at that we really see any of this guilt start to manifest in her behavior. If the feelings she has about this matter are really as crushing as we are meant to believe they are later on, it might have been nice to have those sort of factor into the way she acts earlier in the season, but that doesn't really end up being the case. There's also the issue of how things kind of shift in regard to how much blame can really be put on Hime for everything. At first, it seems like this was all on her and she was entirely to blame, which felt like an interesting avenue that we could explore. What drove her to open the box? Was it a selfish reason or pure curiosity? Either could tell us a lot about Hime as a character. Instead, it later turns out that Hime was essentially tricked into opening the box and letting the villain out of it, which ends up deflating things a lot. It's generally more interesting if a character made a choice rather than being swindled into something, and it ends up lifting a lot of that guilt off of Hime as a result. I can understand not wanting to paint Hime as a terrible person for doing this and not wanting the kids who might relate to her to feel too bad, but it would have been another way to illustrate her growth all the more if she had been the one to actually make that choice. It also would have made her guilt be something that would feel all the more intense and really drive home the way that she inadvertently ended up hurting others. The series also kind of denies us any real sense of closure for this storyline with Hime. The villain that she released, Mirage, ends up getting defeated about halfway through the endgame portion of the season, but Hime really isn't given the level of solo focus in that scene that would feel appropriate given the way that this relates so much to her struggles and her mistakes. There is some one-on-one solo fight content in the lead up to the group finisher being used to end things with that villain Mirage, but it's with Megami rather than Hime in a way that feels like it's mostly related to that relationship messiness that we'll get into later. Hime does come in to help finish things off, but it's in a moment that's a group finisher with everyone together, and she doesn't even get a tiny moment of focus that could connect this to how much it means to her to do what they're about to do. Afterwards, we see a brief shot of her reuniting with her parents, but this goes unvoiced, and we don't really get to see an interaction with them. For Hime to be the one that caused her kingdom to be overrun, and for that being a secret that she harbored for half the season, it feels incomplete that we don't really get to see her reaction to her kingdom being restored or her being reunited with those that she lost. And sure, maybe the episode didn't have time for it, but I think it's something that there could have been made time for since there's a little bit of a lull that happens in the middle of the multi-episode endgame of the season that we could have trimmed back. While we do get examples of how much Hime has grown as a person late in the season, since this was one of her more major emotional hangups that was related to the actual seasonal plot, it's just something that I wish could have gotten the care to resolve and wrap up at the end of the season. This is a season that tried to cram a lot into the runtime that it had, and I appreciate that, but it does mean that there are some elements that either never feel fully fleshed out or just sort of end up getting dropped by the wayside. Yuko is a character that I don't think I ever really got to connect with because of the way that the season handled her. There are places where she really could have gotten to shine, but those points rarely feel like they're being fully capitalized on. As a result, I don't think I can really blame anyone who ends up walking away thinking she is an underbaked character or that she didn't have anything to contribute to the season other than a love of rice. The problems start early. Yuko is initially introduced to us as Megami's best friend and classmate. From her design and the way she is handled, if you don't know anything that was to come, you can kind of already deduce that she will eventually be part of the superheroine squad. It's a fairly common archetype in Precure by now, the best friend character of the lead who ends up getting pulled into magical happenings early on in the run after spending just a few episodes out of the loop. We've seen this before in characters like Rin, Miki, and Rika. They might not have direct ties into the magical side of the plot, but they'll have their own kind of thing going on that they're dealing with that allows them to get focus. Usually when we see these, they're characters that have a little more focus on more down-to-earth slice of life problems that aren't already being covered by the regular girl series lead. In some ways, Yuko ends up covering that pretty well, but there is a pretty strong difference between hers and others of this archetype. Yuko has already been a Precure the entire series, and we just didn't know it yet. Early on in the season, we mostly just see Yuko being a positive influence in the lives of the characters and being a supportive friend with the additional knowledge that her family runs a restaurant. She kind of flies under the radar a little bit, but she's around enough that it does feel like she is actually a friend for the other girls. Then we get to episode 9. Partway through that episode, we are introduced to a new Precure. Now, this isn't all that surprising since this is a season that goes out of its way to let us know that there are going to be multiple Precure around the world and that our leads are not the only ones fighting against the baddies. So that there can be another one out there doesn't feel outside the realm of possibility, especially since this is actually the second other Precure that they have met since they were saved by another one recently. However, while the purple cure Fortune is more mysterious, aloof, and outright hostile towards Hime, This yellow Cure Honey is a much more warm and kind light, giving the girls a bit of a healing boost and advice so they can finish out their fight. Given that Yuko has already been associated somewhat with the color yellow and definitely has been connected with honey via sweets that she gives out pretty regularly, it is pretty immediately evident who this mysterious girl is to the audience, even if the characters have to be a little wowed and confused for a bit. Thankfully, the series doesn't try and tease this out terribly long, and we find out that Honey is in fact Yuko at the end of the 10th episode. The problem with this is it sort of robs us of her origin. Now, that isn't necessarily something we need to see for a character for them to be cool and well fleshed out. For example, we never saw the starting point of Yuri in Heartcatch. However, we did see her biggest defeat and moment of loss, something that goes on to define the way she acts in the early to mid-season, and thus sort of serves as the origin story for her, even if it isn't her actual origin point. It can be really helpful to have something that sort of defines a character and provides a base that the rest of the show can then build off of. Hime, for example, has her whole deal pretty well laid out in the first episode, giving us a sense of her starting point, who she is, and the ways that she could grow. Yuko doesn't really get anything like that. There's nothing really that serves as much as a statement of who she is that is demonstrable in a way that will remain in your mind, at least not in this new role that she is serving in the series. She's pretty established as a friend, but this is a new dimension that almost feels like it needs its own base to work off of since the two don't terribly intertwine. The 11th episode takes us to her grandparents' rice farm, and she does drop a few lines during the fight about things that she wants to protect. But while the screen time is likely something of an even split, the core of the episode does feel like it is focusing more in on the way that Hime is taking the revelation kind of poorly and doesn't understand why someone who purports to be her friend would keep something like that from her. I never get a sense of why Yuko wants to be a Precure outside of her being a kind-hearted person. That is fine. It's good that she's like that, but it does leave her to be somewhat less compelling than the others, which is a shame because I do think that Yuko does have something unique to bring to the team that is otherwise kind of easy to overlook. Yuko has this innate sense of warmth and kindness to her that really ends up being a boon in one area. She is very good at connecting with people and also helping those she connects with connect with others around them. For example, she's the first one that Hime really makes friends with when she starts going to school. Yep, sure, part of that comes down to the fact that she's already friends with Megami and thus is easy and convenient for Hime to make friends with, but it's also because of the fact that for someone socially anxious, Yuko is a warm and calm presence that makes for a really great practice first friend. Later on, there's a point after the reveal of Hime's secret where there seems to be a sort of wedge being forcibly driven into the group. Hime ends up catastrophizing and runs off. Who is the one that is actually able to go after Hime and calm her down? It's Yuko. Yuko is even able to take and relate the secret that she hid her status as a Precure from them and use that to connect with Hime. I'd argue that the two secrets are a bit different in scale to be comparable, but if it works, it works. The place we see this even more is in the episode where the team goes to Hawaii. So we'll get into the international Precure thing as a whole a bit later, but suffice to say, in this season there are Precure girls all over the world dealing with their own different situations. Yuko ends up getting sent around to assist these groups on a pretty regular basis because she has healing capabilities, something that you would assume to be useful for anyone who is partaking in some superheroism on the side, but becomes even more important when you look a little closer. While the main cast that we follow ends up being a foursome, that appears to be pretty out of the norm for the international Precure squads. Most of the other ones we see are solo or double acts at best, with one group being a trio. If that is the norm, then Yuko being sent out to provide a little backup healing is even more important because these girls might not have any other backup to speak of. This is a cool way to utilize Yuko's unique capabilities, even if it is something that is ultimately kind of left by the wayside and never really brought up again after this point. But like I said, she gets sent to Hawaii because the two Hawaiian Precure girls seem to be pretty consistently struggling to work effectively as a magical fighting team, and maybe Yuko can sort them out. What we're shown are two sisters that are failing to communicate and open up to each other, which is ultimately impacting their ability to effectively work as a team. Through this, we get to see Yuko's greatest strength is that she's just this naturally warm presence that is able to get others to open up to her. It ends up being a pretty great showcase of Yuko and a pretty great episode. But once again, this is a place where Yuko's focal time is getting pretty strongly split with another character or characters. Much of this episode's focus is on Ohana and Olina, the two girls that make up the Hawaiian team. And don't get me wrong, that is important for the episode as a whole to function, but it does mean that at this point where Yuko is doing her thing, we don't get to see as much of her doing that as I kind of wish we could. I know that the series would never leave behind the other girls to just follow Yuko doing this, but I almost wish it had, so that we could see how Yuko does when she's off on these solo experiences. We get to see a little bit of it in a single scene where she's helping out in France, but that's something I wish we could have seen more of. The one place where Yuko does get to shine is when we see her interacting with a character that we'll get into later called Phantom. Right now, all you need to know is that he's one of the villains of the season and has proved himself to be a threat more than once. So he gets absolutely thrashed, and then Yuko ends up insisting on making sure that he's okay and taking care of him, and this is the point where she really gets to shine the most, since she has a decent amount of one-on-one time with him that's not really getting interrupted by other people. The other girls are listening and speculating about their conversation, sure, but Yuko is given a chance to mostly just express herself all on her own, which is really nice. I don't even mind the kind of jokey reveal that the one she was talking about so warmly was actually her childhood dog and not some first love like it is initially laid out as. It's a good moment that gets into why she loves and values cooking so much, and the way that she seems to value relationships and connections a little more than some of the other girls, how they are something of a priority for her, and how she uses her cooking to form those relationships. That's also something shown in the episode where she cheerily keeps making deliveries to an old woman who's rather short with her. There are spots where I can really see what they're going for with Yuko, how she connects with people, and how she's a warm influence on those around her. The problem is that she's just a very well-adjusted person, so she's more of a supporting character than the ones who are going through a lot more growth, which makes her a little less memorable in some respects. There's also the issue that outside of those moments where there is a bit of a spotlight shown on her, she doesn't feel like she does all that much but talk about how much she loves rice. She does talk about other things, but the rice stuff comes up so much more that it can almost feel like that is the core of her character at times. Even that great moment of her talking to Phantom does include very specific mentions of rice. If she was just about cooking in general, I don't think that she would be so easily reduced to rice girl, but specifically coming back to the same food over and over again means that is kind of what ends up sticking with you long term. I think there is a lot to like about Yuko. She's just kind of let down by the way that the series presents her at times, which makes her a very easy character to overlook. For proof of this, I didn't actually think I was going to have much to say about her when I started writing this section, but when I searched for her name in my notes, I ended up going, oh yeah, she did do that, at least 3 times. Iona is perhaps the character of the core cast that was the most compelling to me, and if you watch the videos that I did on Winx Club this year, I think it should be pretty easy to tell why. I have a bit of a type when it comes to characters. There are some archetypes that I'm just an easy mark for, and it doesn't take nearly as much to get me invested in them. We all have these, and one of my personal flavors is the asshole with the heart of gold. I like a character that has a bit of a chip on their shoulder, but ultimately still cares and still wants to do good. So Iona was a big draw for me in the mid portion of the season. From the start, Iona is positioned as playing the role of the aloof, not quite ally. This isn't a terribly uncommon character type, and this isn't even the first time the Precure is engaged with it. We had Akko taking up that role in Sweet Precure, for instance. The difference here is that, unlike Akko, Iona has a face and opinions from the very start and actually speaks to share those. She makes herself quite clear right off the bat that she doesn't think that Hime is at all competent at her job as a Precure, and that she does not trust her in the slightest, making for some early friction that Hime is set up to overcome. It takes a while before Iona comes back, and even when she is appearing in the series both as a cure and a civilian, the series is a little coy about overtly connecting the two of them together. Even if, as a viewer, you can really tell from the moment that you take a look at both of them. Her design doesn't change that much. So Iona's baggage is that prior to the start of the series, her older sister Maria was a Precure, cure tender, and she found this out in the worst way because she realized what was going on, and then the villain that her sister was up against turned the attack on her, and her sister chose to protect her. So the moment she found out was combined with the moment that Maria took a bullet for her, which wasn't exactly a great time. This led to her sister getting kidnapped, so Iona managed to snatch her sister's transformation item so that she could take up the fight in her place in the hopes of getting her back. Sometime between then and the start of the series, Iona found out that Hime was the one who released main villain Mirage and thus kicked off the series of events that led to her losing her sister. While Iona definitely has it out for the villains, she also redirects her anger towards Hime. And I get it. Technically, this was in part because of Hime, yet at the same time, Hime is not entirely to blame by the actions taken by others. But Hime is there more often, and Hime is a convenient target that isn't really fighting back against any assertion that this was all her fault, because she believes it at least a little bit herself. While Hime played a part in this, she wasn't exactly aware of everything that would come from simply opening a box, and she is far more valuable as an ally that you can work with and get things done with than someone you blame for everything, distrust implicitly, and avoid as much as possible. Like I said though, Hime is an easy target to be angry with when there isn't a monster around to punch. And let me just say, as someone who is working on her own, Iona is definitely treated like she's a total badass. She gets pit one-on-one against a very powerful enemy, and even if she does somewhat end up losing to him, the fact that she's able to hold her own on her own for so long speaks to the level of experience and power she has compared to the other girls, as well as simply her drive to do whatever she can to get her sister back. You can feel her desperation and her motivation quite clearly, and it makes every fight with her feel more impactful. Yet, at the same time, Iona isn't completely working like she can do everything on her own either. She does certainly see the value in having a team to support you and watch your back, even outright acknowledging that she was only able to pull something off thanks to the others having her back in a fight. The problem is, because of that anger she's holding on to towards Hime, she is selective about who she wants to fight alongside. Once she has revealed herself to the others, Iona has this sort of thing where she will easily work with Megumi or Yuko, but flat out refuses to work with Hime, issuing an ultimatum that is her or Hime, while also being the more attractive prospect because she clearly has a level of power and experience that the other girls admire in her. The rub being that the other two are not the sort to just ditch their friendship and team bond with Hime just so they can work with Iona. Even when Megumi and Iona team up and prove to be intensely effective, Megumi would still rather have everyone work together rather than jump ship. As a result, while all the girls might be on the same side, they're not on the same team. And Hime isn't completely blameless in this either. The fear she might start to lose her friends, combined with how she struggled to make them in the first place at the start of the season, does lead to her showing some bad habits when this ultimatum is thrown down. She catastrophizes both because Iona is an attractive prospect and a partner, and the finger of blame pointed at her that makes her feel like her friends might turn on her, and runs off, leading to stress within the group where Yuko kinda has to sit down and work it through with her. She also falls a little back into bad habits and acts selfishly in her attempt to prove that she can be useful as a team member. This only turns around near the middle of the season, where the girls are all put into a dangerous situation, and Iona has been robbed of her capability to transform, seemingly permanently, in a situation where they kind of need that extra firepower if they're going to get out of there. So, side note that hasn't been brought up yet, but is about to get really relevant, this season has been running with a card mechanic. There are these clear cards that are used to change into different outfits throughout the season and are collected by defeating enemies. Every time they do that, the mascots are able to generate a few cards for them. They're also running with a concept similar to Yes 5, where if you manage to collect up all the cards, you can use them all at once to have a wish granted. Presumably, this is a big draw for a lot of the girls doing the Precure thing, however, one set equals one wish. So, for example, there's a conversation where Megumi might want to wish for her mother to have better health, and Hime wants to wish to restore her kingdom, but even if they both work together on these cards, they'd only get one wish between the two of them. It doesn't take much thought at all to guess that Iona would want to use her wish to get her sister back, and that is part of the reason why she is taking part in everything. Well, in this low moment, after how much of a distance she has kept Hime at, Hime still hands over all the cards that she and Megumi have collected together across the series to that point. This is just what Iona needs to make herself a full set and get that wish. This altruistic act, which is somewhat the result of the growth that Hime has been going through and kind of shows just how much Hime has grown, is enough to get Iona to start coming around. It also helps that going through all that does act as a bit of a bonding experience. Iona, for her part, does end up changing exactly what she wishes for. Because of the pressure of the moment and something of a new perspective of what would be for the greater good, instead of wishing to get her sister back, she wishes for the power to fight and thus become a Precure again with her own special item to boot. This is actually a pretty great moment and feels like something of a culmination of the way the plot has been building up across the prior handful of episodes. It's emotionally impactful, and it feels like the girls are in real danger until this wish is made, and Iona is able to seriously fight back again. The only change I personally would have made is to have some kind of level of a change to her design after this happens to really differentiate her time spent using a power she inherited versus a power she chose for herself. As much as keeping her in the same time does keep the team looking like a unit, she already stands out somewhat by using a different transformation item than the rest of them, so it might have been nice to differentiate her even further as a reminder of this. Like, her sister's design is very gray. Perhaps Iona could have started with that color palette and then moved into having her own after this moment of stepping into her own power. Even if her design didn't change, this would be a new context for it and it would allow her to claim some of it as her own instead of just continuing to be her sister's echo. This isn't a deal breaker at all, though. Just a moment I think could have been given a little more oomph by making a different choice. Though, honestly, I kind of understand it. By the time this episode was airing, merch designs would have been sent off months and months ago, and you can't just completely change a main character's design in the middle of the season like that without it causing an issue that your merch doesn't match anymore. The unfortunate limitations of the need for a show to drive toy sales. What I do appreciate, though, is that even after this moment where Hime and Iona have started to come together, it isn't like they're instantly besties or anything like that. In the episode that follows up on all this, there is still a sense of distance between the two of them that results from the relationship that Iona had cultivated up to that point. Iona still isn't even fully sure if she wants to be part of the team at that point. Funnily enough, it's a shopping trip that serves as a chance for them to get to know each other. We get to see both of them just sort of hanging out, and their differences are highlighted by something outside of the Precure dynamic. They are quickly shown to have pretty different philosophies about how to spend money, and finding a compromise on that is where they start finding compromises with each other. I might personally think that Iona is getting a little melodramatic when she realizes that Hime had her own circumstances that she was dealing with, but hey, it's a kid's show. We're gonna get slightly overdone moments like that now and then. After this, and a big old fight to bond, Iona is officially on the team after a bit of a winding road to get there. I don't think it's too off base for me to say that Iona's journey in the first portion of the season does seem to somewhat want to call back to the appeals of Yuri's journey in Heartcatch, at least a little bit. She's got a slightly darker and more personal motivation, is living with loss, and is overcoming some complex feelings that keep her from fully engaging with the already established pink, yellow, and blue combo squad. Personally, I don't think it entirely hits the same way because Yuri had that element of dealing with death rather than a kidnapping and had been left in a more defeated state, making it more triumphant for her to overcome, something accentuated by the way that she wasn't able to transform and fight before she started facing those feelings head on. However, I don't think this was meant to hit exactly those same beats either. It's a different character in a different story with different goals due to different circumstances. I can see these surface level similarities, but they really are just trying to have the same appeal rather than reproduce the same character. And with Iona, I do think they are mostly hitting the beats where they need to in order to make her both engaging to watch and compelling to journey alongside. Iona's sister being alive also leaves us with something very interesting to engage with, seeing her face off against her lost loved one. Yeah, in some of the most diabolical emotional manipulation that we have seen in Precure, Iona's sister is taken out of her stasis that she's been kept in and turned into a force that Iona has to face off against alongside her friends. Now, given that I have pretty regularly railed against the usage of brainwashing in my videos, you think I might have a problem with this, but I actually don't. I think this is actually a very effective use case. Maria isn't really a character that we know, and she isn't really someone we're meant to believe in their feelings. From the moment she shows up to the fight, she is treated as just what she is in that case, a puppet being manipulated by the villains, rather than someone who is having their emotions arbitrarily flipped around for the sake of conflict. She's not espousing a new set of beliefs. In fact, she doesn't really speak, and none of the characters really believe she's changed size. Everyone sees this for what it is. She has essentially been kept in stasis for quite a long time by the villains, so that they would pull her out and puppeteer her like this feels like a natural evolution of their tactics. She's also the only one this is done to, unlike a season like Sweet that tried to have every one of the villains brainwashed. She's really more equivalent to one of the loved ones of a character being used to spawn a monster rather than a full brainwashing plot, which is why it actually plays a lot better here. Iona, through this, is able to get her sister back before the end of the season like you might otherwise expect to see from a series like this, which is really nice because it means we get to actually see what their relationship is like and how they connect with each other. And Maria is cool, feeling like she's her own fleshed out person rather than some motivational token that's there for the sake of giving Iona a reason to fight and nothing else. She makes her own strong choices, like, for example, the fact that nearly as soon as she's been recovered and seen what her sister is capable of, she just straight out decides that she's going to leave and live with their parents for a bit. She says it's because the girls have things pretty locked down in Japan at this point and can handle things themselves from here, so she'll go and do the whole traveling and supporting other teams thing. But even if she just needed to get away for a while and focus on herself, that would be totally valid, honestly. Iona obviously does not take this well since she has had her sister back for what only feels like days at this point. This is only exacerbated by the way that Maria tells her very suddenly and without giving her much time to come to terms with the news. Iona is also 14 and about to make that somebody else's problem. She outright challenges Maria to a fight since they both do martial arts outside their Precure activities, with the stakes being that if she wins, Maria has to stay. And Maria, credit to her, does something really cool. She simultaneously treats this challenge like both the childish tantrum that this is and also takes Iona's feelings seriously. She jokes around because she knows she can't just let this be the way things are, but she also doesn't throw the challenge and gives it her all so that Iona can be emotionally satisfied by it. She even makes Iona hold up her end of the bargain and give her a massage, which serves as a nice bonding moment between the both of them before Maria leaves. Maria then looks on proudly from the sidelines and just walks away when Iona's Precure work takes her away from the moment that they're saying goodbye to each other. On the whole, it's a pretty strongly resolved episode. However, one of the things I really love about Iona is the way that she just fundamentally approaches things from a different angle than some of the other girls sometimes. Even if she does fall in line at some of the more crucial moments, I think it's always interesting when you get a magical girl team where the characters have different approaches or philosophies when it comes to the job that they're doing. Like, when you make a magical girl a pacifist or a pragmatist while the rest of them aren't, that leaves room to have different perspectives on the team and examine how those different perspectives might interact in a practical environment. Iona does just that because of the way she got involved in all this. You see, Iona was initially kind of a rogue magical girl. While every other Precure in the world had their powers granted them by the god of Earth, Blue, don't worry, we'll get to talking about him in a bit, this wasn't the case with her. She got her powers from her sister when she took a bullet from her. Iona starts a series running on what are essentially stolen powers, acting on her own without the guidance from Blue that the other girls get. Because of that, she hasn't been fighting under his framework or rules, something she has to get introduced to later on when she actually joins the team and, meets him. She's given the same rundown of the other girls, one of the primary things being the rule that he has that Precures are not allowed to fall in love. Now, we'll get into the reasoning and handling of all that little rule a bit later, but at the moment that Iona is told this, she doesn't have any context and is having this handed down to her. This is something the other girls have known about for a while and just sort of take for granted, shrugging and rolling with it as part of the gig. Iona, who only has the perspective of having worked independently, doesn't. She basically looks God in the face and tells him that this rule is stupid and she has no intentions of following it. She even counters him that fighting for someone or something that you love can make you stronger. What's better is the series lets her feel this way without feeling the need to give her some kind of comeuppance to make her fall in line with everyone else. There's no point where she has to get proven wrong. In fact, the series goes on to say that she's kind of in the right since love and hope come out on top at the end of the day. Go figure, this is Precure we're talking about. However, I do love that she is allowed to have a different perspective from her teammates because of her unique circumstances. It makes her feel more whole and realized as a character as a result. Later on, the series is laid out that their goal is to seal the main villain back into the box she initially came out of, despite the way that Blue deep down wishes they didn't have to. Megami deems this as unfair and wants to find a solution where everyone will be happy instead of the solution that seems the most obvious. Meanwhile, Iona pushes back on this, saying that if they can use the power-up item to power up and defeat the villains, that is what they should do, that not everyone can get their happy ending. While watching this part, Megami's perspective is understandable, but at the same time comes off as kind of naive. She's being idealistic, while Iona is being practical. While the series does ultimately side with Megami and does kind of allow everyone to just end up in a pretty happy place at the end, that is something that ends up being kind of hard fought for and a bit more complicated to get to. And while Iona is ultimately deemed as a perspective that doesn't win out, I appreciate that once again, this isn't something she's vilified for either. Iona is the Precure this year that, like Makoto before her, somewhat is acting from a place of trauma. She has already lost a lot to these villains, is one of the people who has been personally victimized by them literally right in front of her, so you can hardly blame her when she looks at something that is potentially a seeming solution to stop them in their tracks forever, and instead of thinking about how someone might be sad in the aftermath, jumps right to the fact that it is possible to put an end to things. It's made clear that she isn't bloodthirsty towards them, but she's able to see the way that each day things continue on, people are put in danger or are hurt. It's not unreasonable for her to want to put an end to that, no matter what it takes to do so. The series doesn't treat her like she's a bad person for feeling this way. Iona is a character that I think could have made for an interesting protagonist all on her own, much like with Hime. She is one that definitely got the love and attention that she needed in order to shine. I came away liking her the best out of all of them, despite her abrasive start. And sure, part of that might have been because she is the type of character that I generally tend to like. However, I don't think it's just that. I think she has a lot going for her that makes her compelling and ends up making her feel like the most whole out of any of them. So I did mention that we would talk about God, so we might as well get that out of the way. And no, this is not me trying to convert you or something like that. God is a literal character this season, specifically the god of Earth. Blue is, well, first off, he's blue, let's get that out of the way, but he is also the god of Earth, and that is something that is left really nebulous, likely to not have to engage with religiosity all that much. While he is often referred to as God, there doesn't seem to be any sort of religious practice surrounding him, so it's a bit more like he's some kind of spirit that has power over the earth, but they call him God, so I guess I will too. I guess that you could say that Blue is quite equivalent to a very knowledgeable mascot character when it comes to his function for most of the season. He spends a lot of time back at base, so to speak, hanging out in Hime's house and dispensing information or advice as needed. He also pulls double duty as the character who knows a lot but won't say it because of either personal reasons or it not being the right time. He does spend a lot of time sitting and thinking in his little extra dimensional mirror space, a spot he is also able to watch over all the Precure girls all around the world. It is kind of unclear just what level of power he has available to him and what his capabilities are. He will sometimes serve as a deus ex machina, coming in to save the Precure girls when they need help, yet at other times he will choose to just not intervene with whatever godly powers he might have. It's clear he isn't all powerful, but just what the extent of his power is outside of making girls into precures, making them their magical items, some occasional support to the girls, and transportation via mirror is completely unknown. However, his function is really to do with that personal knowledge that he has, so that's mostly fine. The biggest factor in his importance is the way that he has a deep personal connection with the main villain of most of the season, Mirage. You see, hundreds of years ago, Mirage was just a normal girl that he had made into a precure. In the time that she knew him, she ended up falling for him and expressing those feelings. He turned her down because he had this philosophy that he was not able to show favor to any one person because he had love for all the earth. Mirage didn't take this well, went a little off the deep end, and ended up getting sealed away in the Pandora's box that Hime later opened. This personal connection between Blue and Mirage is sort of the crux of his character. You can see the way that his experience with Mirage drives his decision making sometimes. For example, he set up this rule that Precure girls are not allowed to fall in love. While never outright stated, this is presumably because of the experience he had with Mirage all those years ago. While it is important that the girls have some love in their hearts in order to be effective at being figures of hope and good in the world, to fall in love is something that he's identified as a problem, so he can't allow it. The problem that I have is he never actually does anything to really enforce the standard that he's set, so it just ends up feeling like an empty threat. Like, Iona blatantly tells him she thinks his rule is dumb and she's not going to follow it, and then later ends up going on a date with a boy. He doesn't do anything about that. He is a fairly mellow character, so him going all wrath of God and making threats would feel out of place, as well as make him not feel like a friendly character to kids, but that he doesn't stand his ground in any form just makes him look like a total pushover. By the way, that date that Iona goes on, one of the best episodes of the season, also has her proving him wrong. The boy she's on the date with is attacked, and in the process of wanting to save and protect him, Iona's strong feelings are what allow her to unlock the upgraded form of the season. This directly flies in the face of Blue's idea that being in love is a problem for Precure, even if Iona isn't necessarily completely in love with this guy or anything like that. You would think this would be something to address, but no, this is never brought up between the two of them, and Blue doesn't seem to have any opinions on it. Blue just ended up kind of rubbing me the wrong way after a while because he is such a passive character that doesn't seem to have any terribly strong convictions if he can't even bring himself to enforce one or two rules. Then you start noticing the way that he doesn't actually do anything to stop the problem himself, instead sending teenage girls as scapegoats against the villain. Girls who end up sometimes captured for what seems to be an indefinite period of time. I get the intent was likely to make him friendly and non-threatening given that he has a lot of rounded shaped language in his design, but from an adult perspective, when I start thinking about him too much, I start seeing some patterns of behavior as more sinister than I think they're meant to be. Like, yes, obviously the reason he doesn't do anything is so the Precure girls are actually doing the frontline work in the Precure show, no duh. but the way it feels like he isn't doing anything of particular worth towards the situation ends up reflecting poorly on him. There's another thing that reflects poorly on him too, but I'm going to save that for another dedicated section down the line. So don't worry, we'll be coming back to We Have Professor Sycamore at Home. Then we have the mascot fairies of the season, Ribbon and Glosson. Because Glosson comes a little later into the season when the dynamic is already pretty underway, she doesn't get a whole lot of attention outside of the way she seems to have a little bit of a tough guy tomboy thing going on here or there. Ribbon at least serves as Hime's minder at the start of the season. She is both taking care of Hime in a physical sense by handling things like cooking and the like, while also serving the role of her Jiminy Cricket at times by giving her little nudges in the right direction about what she should do in a particular situation. The words that I would use to describe these two are functional and unobtrusive. They are there and play support roles as needed, but they never get to the point where they become irritating or get in the way, which I count as a win. The downside is that they don't really stand out to me on the whole and just leave me with the impression of being there and vaguely helpful. There are quite a few characters in this cast, so it just might have been a case of there just not really being a ton of time for the both of them to get a chance to shine. But what I want to say about them personally is I find them to be kind of ugly. I'm not sure what the idea was here, but these little bodies with huge heads and giant ladybug shells just does not work for me. While the mascots of the series can get a little on the blobby side sometimes, most of them have at least some qualities to them that make me think of them as some kind of an animal, which grounds them a little in reality. However, in this case, there isn't really anything animalistic about them, which makes them look like freaky little aliens rather than cute. One fun addition to the season is Seiji, Megumi's childhood friend and neighbor who ends up being a civilian who is in the know and trying to help out in whatever way he can. Honestly, I think there are more seasons that could do with this sort of character since they end up smoothing out some things and are generally a pretty fun addition to the cast when they do crop up. Fresh was the other season that really engaged with this in the character of Miyuki, and then some others that found out at the very end of the season. Seiji, on the other hand, is brought in pretty much right from the start and serves as a pretty active ally and confidant through the whole season. I actually really like that he's here because he ends up giving the girls something that's been missing a little in some of the more recent seasons I've looked at: a bridge to the mundane. One of the things that I haven't exactly been thrilled by in seasons like Smile is the way that once the Precure group is established, we don't really see them interacting much with people outside of that circle of friends. There are sometimes implications that they have other friends or activities going on, but that can just as much fall to the wayside in favor of looking at the girls together. I think this likely stems from casts getting larger. It's easy to integrate those extra elements of the girls' lives when there's only 2 or 3 of them, and it becomes a lot harder to balance when you have something like 5 to 6 of them all battling for screen time. Seiji, as a McNormal person, is there and helpful at times, but he's also got his own stuff going on since he's not dedicating half his time to the Precure stuff. He's a martial artist, and that is something that comes up with him several times, allows him to hold his own, and gives him a connection to Iona even before he knows about her being in on the whole Precure thing. He serves as a point of contact that connects them back to things that aren't Precure. He's grounded, and that grounds the rest of them as well, keeping things from getting too zany. He's super supportive of Megumi too, offering up help wherever he can, like teaching Megumi and Hime martial arts when they ask. From the way he interacts with people, you just get the impression that he's a good egg. There's no other way to put it. Sure, he has his little flare-ups when his emotions start running high, but hey, that's just kids. They're never going to handle everything perfectly. When Seiji screws up, it doesn't feel like it's coming from a place of malice, but one of genuine concern. Late in the season, after going through some stuff that, once again, we'll get to later, Seiji does end up getting grabbed and brainwashed. And yeah, this one feels a lot less justified or satisfying than when it happened to Maria. This feels a little more forced and honestly a bit for shock value, but I'll give the show that his fit is absolutely fantastic. The whole point of this is so that there is a big conflict between Megumi and Seiji for reasons. I will concede that seeing this play out is actually pretty satisfying and does make for a bit of a blowout in the endgame of the season, so in the end, if this plot point with Seiji works for you or not is really going to end up coming down to personal preference and how much you're willing to take that slightly weak motivation in exchange for a stellar emotional battle. There is one more thing I want to highlight about Seiji. Throughout the season, there are multiple girls who, at some point or another, have a romantic interest in him. This isn't the first time that there has been a boy that is the subject of a crush or anything, but this is the first time where I feel like the show has at least somewhat justified that. When I see that a girl has a crush on Seiji, I get it. Other times where we have this boy that everyone likes, he feels like he's a generic pretty boy that doesn't have that much substance to them, like the one from Sweet. But with Seiji, Sure, he's given the benefit of more screen time to endear us to him, but we see him just kind of being genuinely kind and helpful to those around them while having a good attitude and sense of humor to boot. It makes sense to me in the way that sometimes doesn't for other characters that I'm meant to believe that multiple girls are interested in. What is the point of a season of Precure if we don't get to fight some baddies along the way? Let's run them down from bottom to top of the hierarchy. Obviously, you need your guys that are boots on the ground episode by episode. Your generals what summon them monsters that the Precures do the fisticuffs with. This season rotates 3 of them around: Namenkilder, Hoshiwa, and Oreski. All 3 of them are the baseline of entertaining needed to make a new season of Precure, with the usual lack of depth that comes from these sorts as well. This time, they don't really have a unified theme to them, but they each have a vice that makes interactions with them at least a little unique when they crop up. Namenkilder is defined by a sense of laziness and apathy that makes mold grow all over the place whenever he is the one on primary attack. Of the 3, he's the one I found the least entertaining, but I also think is perhaps the most interesting from a design level. His design seems, in part, to be trying to evoke a grasshopper. He's got little antennas on his hat, a green color scheme, and the way his coat flares into this curved shape kind of evokes the big upper legs of a grasshopper. It makes me wonder if on some level he was meant to be calling to mind the fable of the ant and the grasshopper. In this fable, the grasshopper is a layabout who does nothing all through spring, summer, and fall, goading the ant to join him in his laziness instead of the industrious work that the ant is trying to carry out. The ant carries on and doesn't pay him much mind. Come winter, the grasshopper has no stores of food or shelter prepared and is turned away by the ant when he begs for help, leading to his death. When he is purified and returns to a normal human life, Namenkilder is notably some kind of salaryman, the sort put to work day in and day out, the complete opposite of how when he was a villain he was lazing about all day. He was the grasshopper, and when purified becomes the ant. I don't know if this connection was something intentional, though it does feel a little bit that way given the insectoid design he has. However, I wasn't able to dig up anything to confirm that. Either way, it makes for an interesting lens to view him through. Hoshiwa would be someone who views herself as a prim and proper lady, lording over everyone, and her vice is her selfishness. She surrounds herself with sweets and treats whenever she can, and doesn't even begin to consider sharing them. When she has faceless underlings around her, they're not for doing any work or fighting, but for waiting on her hand and foot at all times. She can be a lot of fun to watch if you're one of those people that love the archetype of the cackling rich girl in anime. I found her fun enough, but she wasn't my favorite of this trio. No, that title goes to Oreski. There isn't anything terribly complicated going on with this guy that makes me fall in love with him as a seasonal villain. Honestly, he's just the most fun one to watch. He's got a bigger ego than he likely should, which is enough to make him a fun character already. But then you add on top the layer that he is so desperate to be liked and to be the center of attention like some huge diva, and he is easy to get a light laugh out of now and then. He's even got a point or two where it looks like he might end up moving away from villainy, but it's never the time that the writers are ready for that, so we end up backtracking away again. He's not groundbreaking, but not every underling needs to be. They just need to be entertaining enough to carry the magical battle of the episode. Phantom is where things get interesting. This guy is introduced to us from the start as being the Pretty Cure Hunter, a title that is as striking as his design. The show doesn't shy away from making him feel like a threat either. He completely comes in as this dominating and controlling force that puts the skills of our girls to the test from the moment he shows up. To the point where one of the first things I have about him in my notes is, this Phantom guy goes hard. He's also pretty quickly established as being something of a rogue, because after his first encounter with our crew, we are shown that he didn't have permission to go and fight them like that, and did so of his own volition, giving us the sense that he might have his own underlying motivations. And let me just say, every fight with this guy is killer. He has a one-on-one with Iona, and that just feels like it's a warm-up when you put it next to the fight with Megami that follows up on that. That one transforms into one of the better mirror fights that the series has through the absorption of her shadow to make himself into a mirrored version of her. The clash between these two is stellar, and to me at least, one of the high points of the season. As much as he might be interesting just for the sense of perceived danger he has, and thus the threat that he poses to the characters we love, he's just as interesting for the way he is used after all the girls defeat him and knock him down a peg. That's when he gets to spend some one-on-one time with Yuko as she takes care of him and talks to him. It's palpable how he does soften to her over the course of his stay with them, which does mean it hits you where it matters a little when he does end up deciding to go back to Mirage even after establishing that connection. You see, Phantom is very devoted to Mirage specifically. It's not just about taking things over or having his own fun when he's out there. No, he's out there to eliminate anything that might specifically be a threat to her. He is there for her and her alone, and that makes a lot more sense when you realize he's one of the fairy mascots late in the season. Once he's purified, that devotion transforms into a desire to see Mirage freed from her suffering, which really does feel like the emotions he had were amplified and redirected, rather than him being fully brainwashed, which I think makes for a decent conclusion to him, even if I liked his design much better when he was a human. It's pretty obvious that Mirage is meant to be the woman scorned, and honestly, her having that history with Blue makes her more interesting. Her goal of making everyone just as miserable as her is fueled by a personal vendetta, which in general is just far more interesting than a villain craving power for the sake of power or just wanting to dominate the world because they feel like it. She's mad for a specific reason, and she's going all in because of it. It might seem a little petty, but I think the fact that this is something fueled by emotionality is just fine because it keeps us from having to think about the logic and logistics that might drive her choices. She's being fueled by emotion, and emotion isn't always rational. In the final fight with her, the reminder of the person who broke her heart is what pushes her to double down, not just her whacking away the platitudes of the cures. I think she works great as a villain of the season and also works on the level that you want to see her be healed from what she has gone through. And she does. This isn't a case where we just blast the villain away into vapor and move on with our lives. The moment that the girls embrace and purify her with love is given special emphasis. While it at first looks like they're going to use the same big final attack that they always do, it diverts at the end, showing each of the girls individually embracing her, kissing her cheek, or holding her hands before they all embrace her together. It shows a real acceptance and understanding of how she is just another girl like them, and I like that. However, Mirage is not the final villain of the season, which I do think is a bit of a shame. I think the season could have worked just fine by having her be the final hurdle they have to overcome, since she does have that close connection to Blue, and her motivation does feel like enough to drive the whole season. However, her purification is only the beginning of the end because we still haven't dealt with that evil mirror that has been looming over her and manipulating her to keep hating the entire season. Meet Red. Yes, Blue has an equal opposite called Red. Wow, we're getting real creative here, aren't we? Well, he's actually Blue's brother and the god of a completely different planet that ended up dying out. Thus, he has determined that happiness and love aren't worth anything because everything and everyone eventually degrades, dies, or leaves you, something he has decided to go full nuclear about. Now, while this is a stellar portion of the season in terms of fights that we get out of it and the cosmic scale that things are ratcheted up to, I find myself less enthused about Red, mostly because of how things with him feel a little more dragged out than they need to be. These kind of one last final bosses aren't uncommon in Precure, but they're usually something that is resolved in just a few episodes, wrapping up things at the end after taking care of the villain that has actually been the face of evil up to that point. This usually takes at most 3 episodes, and usually not even the full 3 if it's stretched across that much. However, there are 6 episodes left in the season after Mirage is purified, so instead of feeling like a brisk victory lap, it feels like an arc, one that goes on just a little bit too long for my personal tastes. Red also just ends up feeling a little repetitive, getting mad about happiness and stating his reasons over and over again. I ended up getting pretty sick of the phrase, love is an illusion, by the end of my watch. It might be because I watched this section all in one sitting instead of week to week like the original release would have been, but I did find myself growing tired with him. I think I've just kind of seen his whole deal done better in other places, which keeps him from being all that interesting. It doesn't help that there is one moment that makes him come off as a bit of a creep in the second to last episode. Now, I will admit that it might have just been the subtitles that I had, but there is a moment where after Megami says that she wants to help him and stop all this pain that he's putting himself and everyone else through, Red just slowly hugs her and tells her to fall in love with him and save him with her love. And as a moment, it just feels kind of off. It's brushed past pretty quickly and is definitely some kind of attempt at manipulation on his part, but it feels like a very weird thing for him to say and do towards her, which ended up leaving something of a bad taste in my mouth. Red is fine. I don't personally care for him, but he's not fundamentally broken on a story level or anything. I just think Mirage being the pinnacle would have been a perfectly fine endpoint if there were other story adjustments made to accommodate it. The 10th anniversary season's evil villain is an evil Precure. That could have been pretty fun. As always, always, this season is putting in some pretty good fisticuffs, and there is a lot to love in there. In particular, that basically a quarter of the season is taken up by the Mirage and then Red endgame blowout feels like it is something befitting an anniversary season, and like it might have been one of the more standout features that the season has going for it. In fact, there are parts in this where the animation looks absolutely stellar and really shows off some of the best of what the series is capable of. However, I do think the season is, on the whole, a little inconsistent. Knowing where you should be placing your emphasis and what part of an episode or season need a little extra effort or oomph put into them is something that is important for a production to understand in order to get the best bang for your buck. It's why we sometimes get those conversations that are just shot, reverse shot with some mouths moving and not a whole lot of extra flourish. It's a way to essentially conserve energy for another part where you might need it. That's not something I think this season entirely managed to pull off. There isn't any episode I would say looks outright terrible, and I think there was an effort to keep at least a basic minimum of quality throughout the season, but there are just some points where the way that characters are drawn looks off or wonky, particularly in some of the early episodes where it seems like the show is still finding its footing. It's not like they're unrecognizable, but there are points in some of the episodes where the faces feel like they're melting a little, you know? And the reasonable thought to have is that there was likely a lot of pressure on the season to be the one that had everything together and was the peak of what Precure could be because it was meant to be a celebration of the 10th anniversary of the franchise, and there might have been some cracks in production caused by that pressure. Yet, at the same time, I'm also sat here wishing that they did have everything all together for that celebration milestone, because it is a big deal, and it's a shame to see these cracks show up on a season that should have been so momentous for the franchise. Then again, it's not all that bad, though. The action this season is actually handled pretty damn well, and that is one of the high points that the season has going for it. Much of the action feels crisp and fresh, while also having a bit of a flying by the seat of its pants energy that keeps it fun. One thing that really stands out is the number of attacks that each of the girls has at their disposal. The magic items of the season are kept pretty simple overall, and that means they don't have a sense of just having their single prescribed use and that's it. Megami and Hime in particular just spin a little dial on their wrist and from that alone produce a heck of a lot of different effects in order to take out the baddies. The sheer variety keeps things fresh and allows the girls to get a little silly with how they handle their enemies, making for action that is fun and rarely gets to the point of feeling stale throughout the early to middle season. There are even a few points where they get a little creative in how they take out the monsters, or the monster of the week has some kind of a twist that very suddenly throws a wrench in things. It's pretty great. Things get a little more stale deeper in the season once we unlock the super attack, but we gotta keep using the super attack for marketing purposes, right? I also really like that there is actively a barrier to the girls being proactive and taking the fight to the villains. Magic has been laid over the area around their base, so the girls are power drained if they try and go there. That alone is enough of a reason for them to not storm the castle, so to speak, and soon after they have what they need to go there without issue, they do, which makes them feel like they're proactive and progressing. The super form is also earned individually this time, which hasn't really ever been the case before and does give it a little more impact and allow the circumstances to suit each of them better. The quality of the circumstances to earn it does vary. Iona's is first, and she simply does get the best execution, honestly, while Yuko's ends up being the weakest, not helping how she doesn't get much of a chance to stand out. This season really decided it wanted to go ham with form changes in general, and that I was a little less thrilled about. It's not that I don't like form changes. No, I think they're really fun, and I knew ahead of time that this season had several, so I was looking forward to them. The resulting disappointment comes down to two things: presentation and their theming. Let's start with the presentation, since that is less nitpicky of me. So this season, each of the girls has two special forms that they can turn into to do some kind of special attack. These are done with 3D animation, and I will give you that the 3D animation of Precure is pretty stellar in the landscape of anime, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that it doesn't still stand out when they do it. When contained to the ending themes, it generally does feel more separate, so that's no big deal, but it can feel a little odd when it's just plopped right there in the middle of an episode. However, the more you see it, the more you get used to it. So after a while, it did stop bothering me quite as much. Now, the real issue I have with these forms and attacks is that they feel entirely separate from the action that's going on around them. Early on when they would happen, after they finished, the girls would be back in their standard base outfit again as though they never even happened. Eventually, we would start to see little peeks of them in these outfits in the scene that followed for a little bit, but they never stopped feeling entirely separated from the rest of the world since they didn't seem to exist outside of the canned attack animations. It's also a little less fun to do it that way. If a magical girl is going to have a drastic form change, then it's more fun to see them continue to fight in that new form. It gives things a little bit of a different flavor to liven them up. My other issue was with the theming of these transformations. So each one is meant to be based on some kind of style of dance, and then there is a snack food or sweet added before that. So you get things like lollipop, hip hop, popcorn cheer, or sherbet ballet. That's all cute, but for me, the issue is that it doesn't really feel like it connects to anything more widely in the show. This is the only dancing related thing in the entire show outside of the ending theme dances that are just a franchise staple at this point. This feels like something that honestly would have more suited Fresh, since those characters were interested in dance outside of Precure. That's not to say that this theme can't be self-contained in just these transformations, but more that I think it would have been stronger if it connected with something else somewhere else in the series. The more pressing issue I have is that most of these aren't a terribly good interpretation of the dance style that they are mentioned to be. Some of them work fine, like Popcorn Cheer's attack passes off enough as a cheerleading routine to make some level of sense, even if the ribbon is more of a gymnastics thing than a cheerleading thing. By comparison, though, you have Yuko's other outfit, Coconut's Samba. What she does here isn't the carnival samba that she's dressed for or a ballroom samba, it's some rapid stepping while wildly shaking maracas. Macadamia hula is just as bad. Hula is a form of dance that has meaning and conveys story, but in Pretty Cure, it's reduced down to the cartoonish hip sway and arm wiggle that has plagued its representation for decades. Don't even get me started on how one of the mascots is all excited about a real hula in Hawaii when Hime pulls that out in the Hawaii trip episode. If these forms are going to be named after specific types of dance, it would have been nice if they actually represented that form of dance and how they were presented. So one of the things I think most represents this season, unfortunately, is the way that it is just kind of full of things that are either dropped without much resolution or simply missed opportunities in the first place that never got off the ground. It leads to the sense that the season is kind of incomplete and missing some pieces. Honestly, a lot of this comes down to the way that this time around they were trying to shove a lot in there and just didn't have the room to spare for some of it. There are things that are presented in this season that have a lot of untapped potential, but because of everything else the show is already trying to do, some of that stuff has to get put to the wayside. The most obvious thing that gets dropped is the whole concept of the girls collecting up cards in order to get a wish. This is something that is achieved in the middle of the season. Hime combines the cards that she and Megumi have been collecting with the ones Iona has collected up. It's actually just what they need to make a full set, which Iona is able to use to make that wish to make herself a cure again. It's honestly a pretty good moment and feels momentous, especially if you are someone with genre awareness that expected the whole wish thing would be held off on until the end of the season. Too bad that after this point, the whole concept never comes up again. The girls continue to collect cards for the rest of the season, but not once does the idea that they could get a wish from them ever come back again. It's honestly like the series completely forgot that the notion even existed after that one wish was used. It feels like a core mechanic of the season vanished halfway through. I've already been over how Megumi was handled, but I think there was also opportunity to do something that might have given her some more growth for her early season busybody personality, but nothing ever crystallizes for that. There was some groundwork laid with Megumi's mother being chronically ill, but her mother just vanishes entirely from the season after a while, so that's a wash too. As much as I love how Iona is able to get her sister back, it doesn't escape my notice that the non-character reason why she leaves is to avoid causing any sort of change to the status quo that the series had settled into by that point. But by far, the biggest missed opportunity was the handling of other Precure teams out in the world. This season, Precure went international, and while that is something that feels like it could have opened up a whole lot of different opportunities for new types of stories that the series could experiment with, it never really went anywhere at all. Well, except Hawaii. We went to Hawaii. It's a really cool idea to have multiple different Precure teams all working all over the world for the same goal, presumably taking on different sets of underlings and trying to stem Mirage's progress as best they can. It's just a complete shame that we don't really get to see or know any of them outside of that one time that Yuko takes the girls to Hawaii to help the girls there. Like, we will occasionally see some of the international girls in the background, but they are so little part of the series that it seems like most of the information we get about them comes from art book notes rather than actually being information in the show. Like, Yuko is meant to be casually popping around the world with Blue's help and using her healing powers to help out international girls or teams. but this is something we're really only shown in that Hawaii episode. If you missed that one for some reason, you might never know that that was a side hustle that Yuko had. One of her most interesting functions as a character is realistically little more than a single episode adventure. There was ground to do something really cool with the season by having the girls maybe going out and helping other cure teams or solo acts all over the world, or even just a few episodes where they maybe get together with another group and compare notes about the situation that all of them are in. You have a whole network of precures, but it doesn't seem like any of them are in contact with each other. Given the way that having a group of 4 seemed to be to the benefit of the Japan crew, maybe if the rest of them were given a chance to get to know and learn from each other, everyone would have been more effective on the whole, and we could have avoided some of those captured precures. Just saying. And I know that half of the appeal of Precure is the down-to-earth slice of life elements where the girls are just regular girls going about their lives, having teenage problems and building friendships. I get that. However, when you introduce an element with as much potential as there being a whole world of other cures when no other season has done that before, it's gonna end up feeling like a waste if you don't use it as more than a background element for most of the season. And maybe I would have been a little more forgiving of their stumbles when trying to represent various different cultures if they had actually been trying to show and teach those cultures via these international girls. But when most of them are cardboard cutouts and little else, I find myself being a little more harsh on those stumbles since it doesn't necessarily feel like too much effort was put in for these international elements. Doesn't mean I'm not going to rank their outfits though. Alright, if you have seen any of these videos, you will know I love a good bit of fashion corner time where we look at the designs of the pretty cure girls and stack them up against each other. We will get to that for our happiness charge girls, but I want to do it with the international girlies as well. However, with each of the main girls having at least 2 alternative forms, it would have been really lengthy to combine all of them. Additionally, the international cures are closer to background characters most of the time, and not all of them got the level of consideration that the main cast got because of that limited screen time. So it's a little apples to oranges to try and compare them to each other. Thus, we're separating them out, and I'll be grouping a few other strays along with them along the way. Some of these cures have names given in the show, and many others don't. Their names seeming to come from outside material like art books. So you might hear me call them by a name, or just refer to a country that they're from for the sake of simplicity and clarity. I'm also not going to do every single one that showed up for like half a second in a background shot, just the more prominent ones. At the very bottom of the list in 18th place is one of our American girlies who is part of the Bomber Girls Precure, the yellow one. Now, this is a character that has a bit more detail put into her design since she does get some on-screen focus along with the other girls in her group, so you would think that she would be a little higher up on the list, but I kind of feel the need to put her on the bottom on principle. The Bomber Girls are specifically meant to be based out of Texas, so it's clear they decided to do a bit of an old Western theme with them. However, while the other 2 members of the group seem to be a sheriff and her deputy, this yellow one here seems to be meant to represent a Native American character. The problem is that this very much looks, to me at least, to be a white girl with some feathers on her head. Now, I could be wrong, and maybe this character is actually meant to be Native American, or maybe have partial Native American ancestry, but I really have no way of knowing if that's the case because she's not really a character in her own right, and it really is just her design. This is a culture that has a history of being reduced down to a costume by outsiders, so while it's possible that she's meant to have that heritage, it's also possible that the designers went, oh yeah, Texas means cowboys and Indians, which isn't great. I do think she's cute, but that element of her and not knowing if she is an earnest attempt at representation or a character literally in costume leaves a bad taste in my mouth that I just can't overlook. I feel kind of similarly about both members of Wonderful Net Precure, who are going to be slots 16 and 17. These are the 2 cures that operate out of India. Once again, I think they look cute, but I have some concerns about their depiction and design that are hard to overlook. First of all, I do feel like these girls are maybe a little lacking in melanin. Now, there is a wide range of skin tones in India, but it's also a country that has a complex history with colorism that I will freely admit that I personally only understand at a distance and surface level, so I will leave full discussion of that to the better educated and researched. That said, these are characters that had to be designed, and everything is an intentional choice, so this skin tone was a choice that someone designing them made. Additionally, they do feel a little bit like they're falling into some Orientalist design tropes. Now, India is a place that has a massive number of subcultures, so it's not like you're going to be able to represent all of them in just 2 characters,
but to my untrained eye, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like these designs are veering belly dancer or genie rather than something genuinely Indian. Outside of that, they are cute, but it's just a case where I don't know how to feel about the everything going on here. I do, however, love that they are the first cures that we've seen that have glasses in their cure forms and that they both have them, which is cute. I also love the green and orange color combo that shows off that not every team is beholden to having a pink Cura lead. Between the two, I do put green above orange when ranking them, partly because I prefer the color, and partly because Orange's veil seems like it's kind of just like taped to the back of her head. Rank 15, Cure Nile, definitely falls into those Orientalist tropes and is the place where the pale skin is more inexcusable, but I will say that she does edge out the other two on the design front by just being a little more unique and interesting to look at, with her blue and gold color scheme not being quite so monochrome. I can also see the inspiration from ancient Egyptian artwork in her skirt and headpiece, which does feel like it directly ties her to her culture. However, the sheer pants portion is definitely falling back into those tropes, which doesn't feel great. I like her, but she certainly could have been done better. However, we are now thankfully moving past the yikes realm to take a look at Cure Shelley, who ranks low on account of just being sort of bland to look at. She has a sort of superficial similarity to Cure Rosetta, which is likely the most interesting thing about her. She honestly feels like a possible beta design of Cure Honey, even if that wasn't the case. She's just not all that interesting, but she's also not actively concerning. Unlucky 13th place is going to go to Cure Mirage, the pretty Cure form of the villain Mirage. I'm going to be honest with you, most of this is coming down to colors used and her hair. I don't like this weird little ponytail, but also still her usual bob thing that's going on with her hair. I think if this were the look of a main character that I got to see in action more, I might have come to like it, but on a character design that I get to see only a handful of times, it was never something I got used to enough to really gel with. I'm also not a fan of the color scheme here with this sort of salmony pink mixed with red. I don't care for it, even if I think the yellow accenting on top of her gloves is pretty cute. However, with her being from so long ago and definitely of a different generation than the current Pretty Cure crews, it might have been nice if she had been substantially different in design, more to match the time period she was from instead of looking so modern. Then in 12th place, we have Cure Tender, Iona's older sister Maria, who is mostly here on account of being boring. In a world where most of these magical fighters are bright and colorful, it seems strange that Tender is very much gray. She feels like she's meant to be more mature and adult than the rest of the girls, but the gray color scheme and the pencil skirt design make her feel like a strict teacher rather than a beloved family member. If this was a design that was the result of her having been captured and maybe been drained somewhat as a result of that, it could be something interesting, a reflection of the mental state still not being fully sorted out even after being freed, but we see her in flashback and she looked just the same there. So it's not even like this was something thematic, she just seems so severe. What's worse, her evil form absolutely slapped and looked great and had more color. Spots 10 and 11 are going to be back to back with our two Italian cures since they're kind of designed as a mirrored set. The only difference is color, which is where the yellow one is going to edge out the gray. They share Tender's sin of just being kind of boring and then also looking like generic background characters. The one thing that puts them above her is they both have little capes, which is somewhat intriguing, even if I'm not sure how that has anything to do with them being Italian. 9th place is going to go to Cure Continental, the English Precure, because she is pretty damn cute, but I can't rank her any higher for two reasons. One, she barely has the dark vest of the season, which almost feels a little bit like she's cheating, and two, this is straight up just Alice in Wonderland. I understand going for the idea of tea parties and fairy tales through that, but I can't give too much credit when the design is such a deliberate and precise reference. I personally find 8th place, the Australian Pretty Cure, to be pretty ugly, but I do have to give her credit for being unique. I don't really care for the shape of her skirt, collar, or back bow, but she is at least doing her own interesting thing, which is something. I believe she is technically called Cure Southern Cross after the constellation on the Australian flag, which I do find disappointing because if that's the case, there isn't anything in her design that really reflects that, and I honestly wish she would have been blue rather than red to tie into that flag more. Next up for 7th, we have the Pink Bomber Girl from America. I like her and I do think she's cute, but I don't find her to be necessary. I get the impression that she's essentially meant to be the sheriff's deputy compared to the other girl, which is cute, but because their themes are so similar, she ends up just feeling a little bit redundant to me. I also find it odd that her legs are entirely brown when the rest of her is running with much lighter colors, making the whole thing feel a little bit odd. I like her and do think she's a cute design, but she's not one of my favorites either. Sixth place goes to the Russian Precure. She's a little on the gray side, which I don't love, but it has this blue tone that makes her look more icy than bland. There's not really anything super special going on with her, but I find her appealing in her simplicity. I think the pure fact that she has this jacket a proportion to her costume gives her something of a unique touch without being so ostentatious that it overpowers the design. I think it also speaks to her being perhaps prepared for the climate without verging too much into stereotypes about Russia. Fifth place is going to the Spanish Precure because I think bringing a matador inspiration to her design was a clever concept. It works in an element about her culture without feeling stereotypical and still managed to keep her somewhat in line with the design principles that we see across the rest of the cures. I also love her having this bun with a flower in it that calls to mind the idea of a flamenco dancer as well, marrying two Spanish cultural concepts into one design. Fourth place is the last of the Bomber Girl designs, the blue one. The cowgirl influence is clear here, and I have to say I love the ostentatious stars on her design to make it very clear that she is the sheriff of this group. The only real change I would have made would be to make her boots brown to make the colors a little more cohesive and give them more of a cowboy boot look to her, but that is just a minor complaint when looking at how cute the overall look is here. It's a design that, at a glance, just has a lot of personality. Personally, I love the freckles. Getting into the top three, I think it's pretty obvious that this is the realm that Cure Sunset, one of the Hawaiian cures, is meant to live in. Simply put, the two of them were designed to be actual characters that have a whole episode that brings them to the forefront, rather than just being background elements, which means they got a little more attention than the rest of the international girls. I think that Sunset is a beautiful design that would have fit in decently well with the main girls this season. I love the floral decorations she has, and the flower on her head is big, but not to the point of being overpowering. I love the choice to make her sleeveless, even if the black vest portion of her costume does feel like it's a little getting in the way of her having a more bespoke design. My only complaint would be that I don't think she needs that extra layer of fabric at the hips, and it would have made a more sleek and beautiful design if the vest went straight into the skirt. Bonus points for making me find an orange character very pretty. She is slightly edged out a bit by Cure Wave, though, who will be taking our second place spot. Part of that is because I just like the color a bit better, and part of it is because I think the whole skirt and extra fabric layer look better here. Because the skirt is shorter, that extra piece of fabric doesn't feel quite so out of place, and even thematically adds to her design, the white portion giving the impression of a cresting wave crashing over itself. And first place for Best International Design has to be Cure Art, the French Precure. I just think this is a design that is delightfully cute while also incorporating so much that makes it feel definitively French. I love the giant paintbrush and her name calling attention to the art history of the country. I am being serious when I say a solid half of my time in France this past summer was spent inside art museums or art museum adjacent places. Her skirt calls to mind a fancy little patisserie suite, but the bows on it also make me think of the bows and ruffles of a Rococo court dress, like what caused those revolutions. And her hair also calls this to mind, having a sort of hand wave in the direction of one of those fancy updos, while also keeping it fun and modern enough to make her cute and not dated. She's just an absolutely adorable design that has these little nods to French art without being too on the nose, or letting it get in the way of making her look like a cute, pretty Cure girl. So one of the elements of the season that we haven't talked about yet is the fact that this season decided it wanted to do more with romance than any ever did before it. I admit that while I do find that prospect interesting, the way it played out was something of a drag at the worst of times and could sometimes feel like it was spinning its wheels. I see the vision for what they wanted to do here, I really do, but the execution was somewhat lacking, so we're gonna have to get into all this. For that, we need a chart. Behold. Okay, so things can look a little messy this season. As such, I have drawn up this nifty little chart that we can use to take a look at the relationship dynamics we have and lay them out in a little map. We can use this to guide our discussion and come and go from it as needed to get the lay of the land. Let's go over this, starting simple and getting more complex as we go along. So starting with Yuko and Phantom, this little brown line here represents ship potential. These two end up having a pretty decent connection after she nurses him back to health, and as a result, this is a place where it can feel a little bit like the show wants to tease at it, but they never go full throttle in on anything, so we don't have all that much to think about. This is not the only potential shippable pair on here, obviously, but I added this because otherwise Yuko would be off on her own in a corner of the map, not getting up to anything. Their relationship is something I definitely could see someone playing with in a fan fiction, and she is the one to face him and start his path to purification, but there's nothing official there. This pink line coming off of Phantom represents that devotion he has to Mirage. You can read this in two ways. For one angle, you can say it's his memories of being her fairy partner, and the devotion is caused by that. However, it's also very possible to read this as being a devotion that stems at least partly from him being in love with her. This is a your mileage may vary sort of thing, so I didn't mark him down as being definitely in love with her as a result. We'll come back to Mirage later. Going down to the bottom of our chart, we have Iona and the boy she goes on a singular date with. He definitely likes her, represented by the dark pink, but the light pink going back is the way that Iona doesn't really seem ready for that kind of thing yet. For my part, it seems to be a right person, wrong time situation since she did have a good time on their date. I don't think she entirely feels the exact same way he does, since he is pretty sure of his feelings and she is more conflicted. But it seems to me that this just isn't a good time for her with everything that's going on. These two definitely still continue to talk after their date, and we even see her getting book recommendations for him, so I gave her this pink line, since I think it is something that's not entirely off the table for her. Let them start by being friends. This is the romance that feels most grounded in reality, and it thankfully gets to exist mostly outside of the relationship messiness this season. This is probably my favorite little pop of romance, honestly, mostly helped by the episode that contains their date being one of the best of the season. Now let's get complicated. Hime likes Seiji for a short stint, but that ends up getting dropped because she realizes that it was because they went through a stressful situation together and she kind of latched onto him because of that. This never comes up again after that point, she never says anything, and Seiji never seemed to notice that was going on. This mini arc is dropped right in the middle of a bunch of other relationship nonsense at the time, so while watching it, I was a little tired of the idea that we were going to add another complication on top of everything else that was going on. However, if you pull this out and look at it in isolation, it's really not that bad and makes for a fun little moment where a girl gets to examine her feelings and realize she might not actually like someone that way. It can sometimes be easy to have characters so much as glance at each other and decide that means they're meant to be kind of arbitrarily, so it's kind of nice and realistic for a character to have a crush and then have it pass relatively quickly. Hormones are whack like that. So Seiji definitely likes Megami, and that is pretty undisputed. Her feelings for him are a little more complicated though. Depending on the point of the season we're in, he is either decidedly just a friend or someone that she might actually have feelings for, but this goes without terribly solid confirmation, so there's two arrows because of that complication. Honestly, the two of them have a really great and supportive dynamic that I do enjoy and would make my choice if I were in charge of laying out the canon relationships of the series. Seiji and Megami start decidedly as friends, but you can see the way that Seiji's feelings shift and develop over the course of the season, and that could make for a nicely done friends to lovers storyline. The two of them make a good pair after all. The complicating factor is this man up here, Blue. Now, Megami ends up falling for Blue, and that becomes a whole kerfuffle that I have some thoughts about. She ends up getting her heart broken over this because Blue really only has eyes for Mirage, and she actually reciprocates that, so the both of them are pretty locked in for their endgame, and there's no sign that they're going to deviate in the slightest. Seiji is obviously quite jealous over this whole thing, so that's another factor to add on top of everything else that's going on. When Megami gets her heart broken, it's pretty clear that he sees this as a chance where he might be able to shoot his shot. But you know what? Like I said before, Seiji is a good egg, and clearly pretty mature, because he and Megami end up talking about how she's feeling, and instead of bluntly offering himself up as a replacement just because that's what he wants, he doesn't. He's a good friend, he listens and supports her, because she's clearly not ready for something else to come swooping in just yet. This is what leaves Seiji open to his whole little stint of getting brainwashed, but he does at least try to fight it a little, I'll give him that. This leads to that Megami v Seiji fight, and a whole lot of that has to do with feelings and not stating them and all that good stuff. It resolves with Megami kind of realizing how he feels and how important they both are to each other. She accepts his feelings, and through both that and the power of magic lasers, they manage to get Seiji back. You would think with the way this is written and visually presented that this would mean that Megami and Seiji become an item, and it's honestly left really ambiguous. I think if you squint and look at the rest of the season, you could definitely manage to justify some view that the two of them are dating, or at least considering it, but it's left so open that you could completely take it as them just being pals. which feels off given the big feelings that we were contending with for the two of them. I understand having some level of ambiguity so you wouldn't upset any particular viewers, but like I said, the emphasis their feelings were given, I think, demands a more concrete answer about just how much Megumi accepted his feelings. I get if you don't want to have a kiss on screen, but maybe just holding hands in the final scene could have done it. Red is here because he's Blue's brother and because of that one really weird moment in the late episodes where he sort of tells Megumi to fall in love with him. This isn't anything serious, like I said before, it's more of a weird power play to try and challenge her ideology, but it's odd enough that I felt like it should go on our little chart here. The real thing that causes a lot of messy issues is one little line. Yeah, I think you know the one. This one right here that shows that Megumi falls for Blue. A line that I am sure has launched 1,000 discourses and think pieces about Blue. Now, I do not blame Megumi for catching some feelings about Blue. He is a grand mystical force in her life that makes her feel like she is special and important, who praises her when she does well, and whom she thinks she has a unique connection with because he has let her see him when he is vulnerable. It's not uncommon for teenage girls to get a crush on an older guy, be it a celebrity crush or an upperclassman or some adult in their life. There are teenagers who get crushes on adults in their lives because hormones go burr and they don't necessarily have the framework fully in place to grasp why that's not appropriate. Megumi does not get any blame in this from me. Blue, however, absolutely does. This man is over 300 and I would expect him to be able to recognize the result of his own actions. Blue clearly has a complex over the whole Mirage situation and how that initially worked out, leading to his implementation of that whole no falling in love rule. So if that is something that is bothering him even all these years later, you would think he would be hyper aware of how he interacts with the Precure girls, right? Apparently not, because he does give Megumi a decent amount of special attention despite how he has been acquainted with Hime for longer. There are interactions and one-on-one conversations between them where he is open with Megumi, and clearly that level of interaction is causing her to think he views her as some special confidant when he really doesn't actually seem to. He shows her a level of care that is a definite slight step above everyone else in his immediate vicinity. If he was cognizant at all of his own actions, he would be somewhat more aware of that. To put it bluntly, given his history with how things worked out with Mirage, Blue is either willfully ignorant of the way that he is leading Megumi on, or he is simply an idiot. Neither bode well for my interpretation of him as a character. And given that he never does anything to dissuade Megumi or even notice the way that she is feeling or acting towards him, even after a jealous Seiji tries to give him the big old "don't you dare hurt her" talk, I think he's just kind of an idiot. Now, although this is kind of a simmering background element, outside of the handful of episodes in the middle of the season where it comes to the forefront and kind of drags the series down. Let's be honest, the section after the middle of any Precure season usually tends to drag just a little bit, because we have some time to kill before the finale blowout, but too many episodes for the momentum of the mid-season to carry us all the way there. However, this is made a little bit worse when you plant this romantic melodrama right in that section, which I think leads to people remembering this segment of the season as being much bigger and more of a drag than it really actually is. It's movie time. Miracle Lights. How were they handled? Well, this time around, there was half a second where I thought there wasn't going to be a Miracle Light intro at all. The movie had just sort of started, which it wasn't that odd. There have been movies that didn't have the typical intro after all. I was caught off guard a little, though, when the intro was combined with the opening fight of the movie. However, it was over really quickly and efficiently, while also giving the information that was needed. Solid A. So the thing about this movie is that it is, in essence, just a retread of the Smile Precure movie. We have a new character that seems like they're a friend here to take us on a magical adventure until it turns out it was all a ruse and the character has some not so pure motivations that are being spurred on by the main villain of the film. Here's the thing though. Even if it's a retread, some of the details are different, and this was a formula that worked pretty damn great. The Smile movie is one of the better ones, and I would put the Happiness Charge movie up there with it. Of course, that is all dependent on if you like these characters in the first place and want to see them go on an adventure. For me, the characters are likely the strongest part of the season, so I was down to just go off and have some fun on the side with them. Your mileage, though, will vary. The place I think that will most vary for people is how Hime is handled in this movie, since I think it would be very possible to find her grating in this. Early in the movie, the girls are doing a puppet show for some kids, and from this springs the fact that Hime really wants the whole swept off your feet by a prince on a white horse fairy tale experience when it comes to romance. Well, it turns out there is a prince in this side world, and Hime gets a little stupid and silly about that for a bit. It's in a way that I found not necessarily funny, but true to her and mildly amusing. But if you lack patience for this kind of stuff, I can see how that might get somewhat grating. Personally, I found the way that Iona was on her guard and keeping an eye out for anything that might be off, already putting together the pieces the audience might be because of the way things are behaving a little different from the formula, really interesting. It keeps us from feeling like the characters are getting blindly swept up in the whimsy of the adventure if someone is still keeping their wits about them, even if she still gave into the fun and play of the moment when she does some dancing at the fancy ball that they end up taking part in. However, I think the strongest element of the movie is certainly Tsumugi, the new movie-exclusive character that we need to both fight and save in equal measure because she is both villain and victim. You see, she is manipulated by the main villain Black Fang because she's been going through a bit of a rough patch. She's a dancer and has been almost her entire short life, it seems, but lately her legs have stopped working properly and nobody can figure out why. This has impeded her from dancing in the way she used to. She sees the cures on TV essentially saying they're here to make everyone happy, which that can't be true because she is decidedly not happy. This is the opening that Black Fang needs. He takes her and drags her into the magical land he has created, where all her dolls and stuffed animals are now real, and she is able to dance just as freely, if not more so, than she was able to in the real world. He presents her with all this, everything she wants, as she is going through the roughest time that she ever has in her young life, and then tells her, if I'm beaten by the Precure girls, all of this vanishes forever. Do that to a kid that's going through it, and yeah, it makes total sense why her emotional reaction was to turn on the cast in order to preserve this world that feels so much better than the one she's been living in. The movie even goes out of its way to show us she isn't cruel or heartless. She feels bad when she has to say mean things to Megumi, but she does it in the name of preserving this little slice of happiness. The second she shows even a shred of a sign to standing up and pushing up against Black Fang, he turns on her and wraps her up in an evil cocoon. It's obviously not a great situation to be in, but she's a kid that's been manipulated. He can't really get mad at her. The only thing I truly do not like about how Tsumugi is handled is I don't care for the way that her being unable to dance is revealed to be basically a curse that was afflicted on her by Black Fang. I think it would have been stronger to have some real world thing that is keeping her from dancing again, such as a car accident or something of that nature. I understand the movie wants to have the happy ending of her being able to dance again, and that him having done this to her too only intensified the way he was, in effect, grooming her as his pawn, but at the same time it does veer a little too close to the magic caused/fixed your disability type stuff. And I have just a few other little gripes that keep this from managing to completely surpass the way that Smile pulled off this same premise. I think the visual theming from the villain is on the weak side. While the whole rest of the movie is running with the whole dolls and ballet thing, this design isn't doing anything that feels like it meshes really well with that. I think giving him some sort of Black Swan-esque design element could have played nicely off of the way that the super form of the movie has some White Swan elements going on with all the feathers. I also don't love that Megumi is the only one who gets the movie special form. Usually this is something that doesn't bother me too much, since the pink lead will have some level of pronounced role in the movies, but that's not the case this time around, and while Megumi did spend a little more time with Tsumugi, everyone felt like they had a decently equal role to play. There's even a moment where all of them are putting their hands in together for something, and with Megumi being the only one there in the special form, it feels a little odd. It really could have just been color-swapped versions for the rest of them and looked perfectly fine. I'm also not fond of the way that there was some reused footage for the fights. Like, I get it, there's going to be stock footage in the Magical Girl movie. What I mean, though, is that each of the girls only really uses like 2 attacks tops when they're doing anything but the big final blowout attack. For most movies, that wouldn't be too bothersome, but this is a season where each of the girls had quite a well of attacks to use, so it was disappointing to see things like Iona using the same tambourine attack twice when I know she can have more versatility than that. In the show, things are a bit more spread out, but in the movie it's all being seen within a shorter time frame, so I find myself a little bit harsher on this sort of reuse. However, I did like the way that the first usage of the miracle lights actually failed, which felt kind of refreshing after the way they've so often been a deus ex machina in this series. They end up getting blocked, and it's only when Tsumugi expresses her belief that they are able to work. It feels like a nice little twist on the formula, and I can't help but appreciate that 10 movies in. Really, though, this is, like usual, a movie that, if you actually like it or not, will really depend on how much you like these characters. I think it's passable enough, the only sin being that it drags in the middle for a little bit, but for a movie that's only 70 minutes, I can live with that. Usual disclaimer time that I'm not talking about these items as the toys they are meant to be, but instead looking at them from the perspective of how they are handled in the show, because they won't be on sale forever, so they have to integrate well enough for them to not be weird in the show when you don't think about them in the toy context. So we have the Pre-Chan mirror. This is the basic transformation item that interfaces with the cards of the season to allow the girls to transform. Personally, I don't love the way that it looks like a big chunk of plastic, but I do think this is a pretty good implementation of a magic item like this, and mostly of that comes down to the cards. Like I mentioned before, there are a lot of cards that the girls are trying to collect up, but what I didn't mention is that each of these cards is clear outside of the pieces of an outfit that's on them. So when they're layered over images of the girls, they're able to transform into different outfits, many of which have an interesting or wacky purpose to them. There's a detective outfit, a roller skating outfit, a mermaid outfit, a fancy party dress, all sorts of stuff. These are a variety of different cards that the girls can use for civilian reasons. Just looking at it, you can see how this would be a pretty compelling toy in terms of the dress up concept alone. I mean, I get it. I spent a lot of time playing with a toy that was a knockoff of Fun Fabric Fashion's Barbie, a sort of clamshell that you closed around different arrangements of a handful of fabric scraps in order to make different outfits on the doll. You give a kid who loves playing dress up some mix and match options and they'll be set for a while. It's a fun idea that brings the transformation object to the point of having more than one singular purpose, meaning it can be integrated beyond its obligatory space in the transformation sequence. While not all of these outfits are bangers and it sometimes feels like they're just trying to find an excuse to use them, there are plenty of times where they feel like they're actually part of the show for more than just selling you on this toy. I mean, some even get reused more than once, which is usually something of a rarity for the collectibles in a series that are meant to do something. These stand out more than the little charms or MacGuffin creatures that they usually try to sell us on having a use once they've been collected, because the uses are plainly more self-evident with an outfit than a charm or a blobby creature. They have the chef outfit, and that helps them cook. A connects with B very obviously in a way that's satisfying. What I find interesting is that now is the time they choose to bring in this sort of card mechanic, since this is something we haven't seen since the first 3 seasons, so it makes it feel like a bit of a nostalgic throwback as well, which I think is a bit of a fun touch for a 10-year anniversary. Now, Iona initially has one of these, even if we never see her transform with it, due to her not being part of the team and thus arriving already transformed off screen. However, when she gets her ability to transform taken away and then wishes for that power back, she is granted a new and different transformation item that is unique to her. While this makes her stand out since it was granted by a wish, I do like this a lot less since it's far more bulky, making it look even more toyetic than the standard one. The shooting star motif is great, and I do love that for her since she already has a lot of star imagery, but the fact that it is a rainbow piano on the inside doesn't feel like it connects with her very strongly or have much to do with the theme of the season, really. It sort of connects with her weapon, but it's unclear if this is a chicken or egg situation between the two. The whole piano thing just feels like it's there to be more of a toy, especially when coupled with the big gaudy ring she seems to have to wear to use it. The only other thing of note about it is that she is able to just vanish it into her hair ornament after she transforms, so she doesn't have the big ugly pink bag on her hip like the other girls, giving her a more sleek and cohesive design compared to them. The Love Pre-Brace is the standard weapon of the season, even if only half of our girls use it. Iona used to have one before the mid-season shift, and the international girls all seem to have it as their weapon. This is a nifty little thing because it has a lot of variety. Because of the way it can sometimes feel like these girls are making up their attacks on the fly, this item does all sorts of fun and interesting stuff, all from the same action of just giving the little dial on it a spin. It's a standard enough way for the girls to call on magic, and the way it's presented in the show flies by and is unobtrusive enough that I don't mind them all that much. The Dance Honey Baton is what Yuko has instead of the pre-brace because she has those extra healing powers, and this is how she makes use of them. Despite being a baton, it's shown very often in a sort of microphone usage without any changes to it that might indicate that that's what it's for, but hey, it's the magic item, they can just do that stuff. I don't get exactly why she has a different item other than toy sales when she could just have a magical singing voice, but I can't bring myself to get terribly mad at it or anything like that. It's just fine, and let's be real, Yuko could use something special to make her stand out. Iona gets the Fortune Tambourine, which I guess kind of connects with the idea of her having a musical instrument for her items, but it's not something that really comes through for her for me. What I can say about this item though is it's actually pretty cute looking, suits her motifs well, and has a unique look that makes it feel like a magical evolution of a tambourine. The Cure line is just a smartphone. Yeah, these kids get given magic smartphones by God, I guess. I don't know what else to tell you about it other than that. I can tell you the reason that this is not just part of the transformation item is because they end up giving it to Seiji as well to help him keep in touch, and since the show doesn't intend for him to be a magical boy, it needs to be a separate item. These are fine, I guess, but do feel like an excuse to have an electronic PDA toy because they could have just had regular phones. Lastly, we have the Shining Make Dresser, which is the item that's used for the big special attack this season. This is once again something that's pretty standard, and the fact that it has a makeup motif does actually suit the way that it's topped by a big mirror, which I do like. Personally, I just find it to look a little gaudy, but it's not like it doesn't match the rest of the stuff this season, so that's fine, I suppose. So it's time to get back into the fashion corner with our main girls to talk about everything transformation and design this season. Right off the bat, I'm going to be honest that this was not one of my favorite seasons design-wise, and a lot of that comes down to the girls looking so uniform this time around. Everyone has that black vest, and while that does break up the design somewhat and provides a nice dark contrast to the bright or pastel colors that they're sporting, it does just also give the impression of all looking like waiters, which leaves them, to me at least, feeling a little less magical. They're also exceptionally similar to each other, to the point where I would say that they are more similar to each other than any of the other uniformed groups that we've seen. The only strong difference in their base designs are minor variations in the shape of their sleeves and skirts, different shoe and glove designs, and their hair. That might sound like I am listing everything about their designs, but when you line them up, they all look very similar. While they have these differences, the differences aren't very drastic, which makes them look really similar at a glance. It's only when looking them over in detail that you notice how different they are. Not every Magical Girls series has to have design variety. For example, the costumes of the Sailor Moon characters are very similar, even more so if you're looking at the 90s series where they're practically identical. The difference is that Precure in general does have more of a track record of individualized designs with some overlapping elements, and even in those seasons where the girls are a little more uniform in the outfits, there will still be something that sets them apart from each other, like stronger differences in hair or accessories. Here, there isn't even that much variety in the hair. 3 out of our 4 girls have ponytails, the highest ponytail concentration that we have ever seen in one season. Yeah, that makes them battle ready, but it does feel like there's a lot less variety among the core cast this season. A little about their looks feels very personalized, which might have been the point when the Precure in general are a lot more mass-produced this season, given how many girls are fighting outside of our team. But when I look at those cures and see that they're given some variation in their looks, I can't help feel a little disappointed that the main cast doesn't have more variation, especially when their civilian outfits are all pretty varied in their sense of style that feels like they speak to the character. For example, Yuko tends to favor comfort over fashion in her outfits, while Hime tends to dress in ways that are quite frilly and feminine. And yes, there are the alternative forms that they have, but these are also something that come and go very quickly while also being on a sliding scale of quality and yikes. They're all focused on styles of dance that don't really connect with each of the girls terribly much. Like, for some of them, I can see the logic of how they got there. Hime being given ballet does make a lot of sense, but for others, the logic is tenuous at best or feels more like they were arbitrarily assigned. So yeah, definitely not my favorite season on the design front, but not every season's gonna appeal perfectly to my sensibilities. However, when I remembered that this season was a celebration of the 10th anniversary of the franchise, I can't help but wish they had gone a little more all out in the base designs. As for the transformations, those aren't my favorite either. They're not outright bad, but I find myself a little underwhelmed by them. The card mechanic used to kick off the transformation is perhaps a little toyetic for my taste, but it's something that's a unique enough flavor of the season that I'm definitely willing to roll with it to have a good time. However, I will maintain that Iona having a completely different transformation item by the time we're getting part of her in the group transformation just completely breaks the flow of the whole thing in a way I don't care for. The transformations themselves focus far more on the accessories than the outfits, but given that they are so uniform, that actually makes a ton of sense to me, and the outfit itself being revealed all at once and then just topped off with the bow at their backs works fine. I personally don't care for them being in these big cloaks for most of the transformation though, since it does feel like they sort of turn into big colored blobs with arms and legs sticking out, while also looking like they're spending half of the transformation in a cape from the hairdresser. I think the glowing jumpsuits that they start with or get when half untransformed would have worked just fine, even if that means you would have lost them dramatically throwing off the cloaks partway through. The biggest issue with the transformation is that it just feels like there's too much flailing and spinning at points to where it gets a little messy. It's never to the point of feeling overwhelming or confusing, but there are points where movements feel unmotivated and like they're just there for the sake of motion rather than the natural flow of a transformation. These girls are just flipping and spinning all over the place. Let's get into looking at the actual looks though. For me, last place is going to go to Coconut Samba. I can see that it's going for the ostentatious costuming of Carnival, but it's just not something I find personally appealing. Like I've said, the way it's executed in the show has little to do with actual samba dancing, and I'm not finding the combinations of colors on here to be particularly appealing. The 14th place goes to Lollipop Hip Hop. The best thing it has going for it is that it does something a little different by changing up in her hair in a way that looks really cute. Otherwise, though, this doesn't feel particularly hip-hop inspired or like it's drawing any real streetwear trends other than just being something casual looking. The biggest sin for me, though, is plainly that I hate the colors on this one. The yellow isn't terrible, but it does not mix well with the green that was added here at all, and the asymmetry of the outfit isn't doing anything for me either. 13th place is going to go to Pine Arabian. The colors are much better here, but once again, I don't think this really suits what it's claiming to represent. The design is cute in a vacuum, but I think this is another case where we are falling into some Orientalist stereotypes in order to make the design. This doesn't give Arabian, but rather Party City Belly Dancer, I Dream of Genie, or Jasmine Disney Princess. In 12th place, I am placing the Innocent Form power-up. Megumi is here as the example image, but that's because all of them are basically the same when they get this form. This time around, the literal only difference between them is their hair, as their dresses, shoes, and accessories have all been made exactly the same. I just kind of hate that on principle, since it means that even though each of them have to earn this form individually through personal circumstances, nothing about the form is personal or reflects the feelings that it took for them to reach it. The form itself also looks pretty washed out because it's all light colors, and even if I think the design of the dress isn't that bad, the 4-tone skirt isn't doing it for me. I'm also not really sure how I feel about the whole makeup thing. I get that it is part of the appeal of the designs on some level, but it never stops feeling weird to me as I was completely unused to seeing these changes to their faces. Just barely missing the top 10 at 11th place is going to be Cure Honey. I don't think that she's awful or anything, but I do think she is the weakest of the base designs, and a lot of that unfortunately does come down to the skirt. Like, I love her hair and her boots, even if I could take or leave the sleeves, but the skirt really does her in. I think it's doing the same thing as Cure Pine's design, where the shape of it just makes it feel really frumpy in a way that doesn't suit everything else that she has going on. Number 10 is going to Macadamia Hula. This is certainly not a hula outfit in the slightest, so I am docking it a bit for that, but otherwise, this is just really cute on Hime. It gives something of a forest fairy vibe, and I love what it does with her pigtails. The big stopping points come down to the back of her hair looking out of place to the point where it can be a little distracting, and the big pink bag on her hip just not fitting with the entire rest of the design and standing out like a sore thumb. 9th place goes to Cherry Flamenco, and a lot of that comes down to the makeup feeling like it is overdone and out of place. Otherwise, this is a pretty fun design that almost feels like a touch of a callback to Cure Passion in the color and the shape of the dress. However, I wish it didn't have that pink bag since it calls attention away from the big flower ornament on her other hip, and I do kind of wish her hair had been changed more than just leaving it in the usual ponytail. 8th place is Anmitsu Komachi. I think this is actually really cute, and the big sleeves are such a fun design feature for an outfit like this to have. In fact, bigness seems to be the name of the game here, with the big bow at her back and then her hair getting turned into a bow on top of her head. I don't know if I would have all the frills on her, and I do think the color is a little desaturated, but for a form that doesn't actually show up all that much, this is a plenty fine design. 7th is Popcorn Cheer, and yeah, this is a cheerleading outfit. The colors here are really fun, and just changing from a ponytail to pigtails does a lot to make this look fun and energetic. I don't know if I care for the white part with a ruffle in the middle, since I feel like we could have just had this be a two-piece. However, my favorite element to this is the marching band-esque detailing on the boots and the way that the hair ties evoke a pom-pom without actually being one. 6th place is going to go to Cure Princess. A lot of her placement comes down to her coloring, honestly. These are some really nice shades of blue that are really appealing to look at. Her having pigtails in a sea of ponytails also does a lot to make her stand out, and I love the little crown accessory on top of her head. I even love her sleeve shape since it goes nicely with the wing shape of her back bow. The thing that's really holding me back is the shoes, unfortunately. While everyone else has these nice long white boots, she instead has the short white boots with these long dark socks, and that deviation from the pattern makes her look a little out of place. Entering the top 5, we have Cure Lovely. This is a very appealing color palette for a pink, and she is one of the ones where I actually don't think the black vest looks all that bad on her. I love the shape of the top of her boots, and her hair is usually done in a way that the swish and curve of it appealingly accentuates her movements. Just a solid design all around. She is just, however, beat out by 4th place Cure Fortune. I'm going to easily admit that the deciding factor between these two designs was mostly based on color, since I think they are otherwise pretty close as a tie. I can't help but be appealed to by my fellow purple girly. She also has my favorite skirt shape of all the girls, which helped edge her out a little bit. 3rd place is going to Sherbert Ballet. It really does a lot to give Hime a completely different look while still remaining recognizably her. We have ditched the 2 big pigtails, but the way her hair splits still gives a little bit of the impression of them, even if it's actually stemming from the big heart-shaped bun she has on her head. Bringing her color from blue into that indigo also complements her hair tone really nicely, and I love the shape of this dress. It's just very cute. Props to the big flower accents on the ankles, actually calling to the big ankle cuffs on her boots. However, we must admit she is slightly beat out for 2nd place by the other ballet look that stems from this season. While this is actually called Super Happiness Lovely, let's be real, when you think of this, you're really thinking of the version of her that is a ballerina. This is what I think a little girl feels like a fancy ballerina should be dressed like, even if it's not actually very realistic or practical to dance. It's 4 layers of ruffles, a crown, a feathery bodice, and ribbons all the way up the legs. It's both ballerina and princess all rolled into one to feel like an angelic dancing dream. I wish we could have seen something similar for all the girls. And if I said it once, I'll say it 100 times. I'll stop ranking the pink designs so highly when they stop making such good pink designs. Can I say what a wonder it is that letting Megami have her hair down fully like this just seems to inherently make her feel more powerful, as though she doesn't need to worry about it getting in the way anymore as a statement of power in and of itself. This is a great design, and I think if you tone down the sleeves a little, this could have been almost a base design for all of the girls to work off of. It might have been a base I preferred, honestly. You still have the same vest shape, but I think the white suits better than the black does. Normally, I'm the first to complain that lightening up the colors on the girls when they grow more powerful tends to make them look washed out, but for some reason it's not bothering me this time. Perhaps it's because her pinks were so saturated in her base form that lightening them up like this one doesn't leave her looking entirely stripped of her colors, and she still easily reads as being quite pink to me. Either way, this is a stellar form, and I think easily the most beautiful to come out of the season. Even if I wasn't generally vibing with this season in terms of design sensibilities, I'm glad there are at least a few forms or designs that I could really fall in love with by the end. You would think that with all the relationship nonsense going on this season, it would be one of the most aggressively heterosexual ones, but no, take any combination of our 4 main girls and tell me you ship them, and I see the justification. Honestly, any pairing between Hime and one of the other 3 makes a lot of sense to me, since there were a lot of moments that just work. Like, Megami and Hime have a celebration for the 100th day of them being friends and cut a cake together. It is outright commented that this is like cutting a cake at a wedding. It's almost like the show is inviting us to view their friendship through that lens, especially after the power of holding hands let the 2 of them unlock combo attacks. Megami also generally talks about her happiness going wild and how she has to tell Hime about those feelings, which could be platonic or it could not. Yuko proves to be one of the people that is really able to calm Hime down whenever she gets emotionally worked up, and that calming presence proves to be really good for her in a way that you could easily see a relationship building off of it. Yuko also very sweetly and closely teaches Hime how to cook in a way that feels delightfully domestic. And honestly, Iona and Hime have the good old rivals/enemies to lovers story. I don't know what to tell you. Just turning animosity into respect and affection is always a good time, no matter the context, and you can see that between these 2. Generally, there's a lot of holding hands and blushing between all of these girls, which once again you can interpret easily as being platonic, or not. When Maria is brought back and all the girls get to hang out with her for the first time, Megami and Hime are all about her and start an episode gushing about how cool she is, while the both of them are surrounded by literal shoujo bubbles in a way that feels a little bit pointed. And of course, at Christmas, when Megami and Seiji are having a moment together that feels at least a little mildly romantically charged, the other 3 are off having their own moment. Hime, lacking a boyfriend to share her time with, ends up just deciding to share her love with Iona and Yuko instead, which makes for a very cute moment, and behold, a throuple is born. As usual, it's a lot of stuff that's really up to interpretation, and you could take it more than one way. Nothing is definitively or concretely queer. However, that's part of the fun, that you could take it in another direction if you really wanted to. There are multiple ways to view little moments like these, and if these little moments let someone feel seen, I think that's wonderful. And in episode 21, there's a point where Hime, Megami, and Yuko all hold hands while Blue watches through a mirror. He declares that they should believe and support in each other because that is love too. I'll be real with you, I did sit there and nod and go, this too is Yuri. However, all this fun does not mean that the season is incapable of disappointing me. No, for the second season in a row, the season is engaging with making a villain who is a gay stereotype, and that is played for a gag. I don't want to repeat myself too much between videos, so for a look at what I mean by this, see the section on queerness in my video on Doki Doki Precure, where I talk about the character of Leva, since most of what I said there can apply to the character of Madame Momere, the villain that the Hawaiian Cures are regularly facing. However, it's been made even more overt here, and I think we can all agree that's a problem. The only good I can say about this depiction is that it lasts for just a single episode rather than a whole arc. The funny thing about this season is that when I was writing the script and working my way through talking about the characters, there were points where I was wondering if my overall assessment of the season was too harsh. Like, was I being too hard on it by deciding the whole thing was a bit of a mess when there was stuff I was really able to talk about with the characters? However, taking a step back and looking at the thing as a whole, I think it's a case that making myself look more deeply into the characters made me appreciate them more. Like, it's really easy to overlook Yuko if you don't pay that much attention to the way she supports others. However, while Precure seasons live or die on their cast being fun to watch or engage with, that doesn't mean a cast alone can plaster over other issues a season might have. This season simply tried to do too much, and as a result was kept from fully exploring some of the elements it introduced. These dropped plot points, inconsistencies, and places where it feels like there were missed opportunities add up over time and contribute to the season feeling like it was not able to fully come together. As a result, it's a season that ends up feeling kind of middling if you like the characters and terrible if you don't. For me, this wasn't my least favorite season of Precure so far, but it is on the lower rungs. While there are definitely pops of good in there, it's not one that I'm ever going to feel the need to come back to again. Oh well, on to that season what has the princesses. If you stuck around this long, I really appreciate that and would appreciate it even more if you would do the whole like, comment, subscribe rigmarole. I hear this thing called hyping now too, whatever that means. I don't know a lot about how to do this whole engagement thing, but I do know that I like to see numbers go up. If you want to support me more directly, I have a Patreon. Obviously don't feel obligated though. I've been Mel, and thank you so much for letting me info dump at you.